Thank you for joining us. This will be the question-answer session at the end of my seminar. So if you've made it this far, you've already heard the answers to many other questions that we will not bring up here during Q&A. Questions like where do dinosaurs fit in, things like that. One of our jobs as Christians is to be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh us a reason of the hope that's in us. And I think it's important that we have some answers, and that's what we're going to try to provide on this tape. In Ecclesiastes, the wise man Solomon said, I applied mine heart to know, and to search, and to seek out wisdom and the reason of things. And that's what ought to be all of our goals, is to be able to search the Scriptures, search through the real scientific evidence and say, what is the truth about some of these questions? The Bible tells us in 2 Timothy to study, to show yourself approved unto God. One of our jobs is to study and know the truth. So let's take a few questions here. I get questions mailed to me and emailed to me and given to me at seminars like this all the time, and feel free to write your questions down. And when we're done with the normal questions we ask, we'll try to bring yours in there if there's time. One question I get asked, how can you creationists be right when all scientists believe in evolution? I'll say, now hold on a minute. Not all scientists believe in evolution. Actually, only 55% of the scientists believe in Darwinian evolution. Just slightly more than half. And even if the majority of scientists believe something, that doesn't prove anything. In John chapter 7, it says, many of the people, therefore, when they heard this saying, said, of a truth, this is the prophet. Others said, this is the Christ. But some said, shall Christ come out of Galilee? Hath not the Scripture said that Christ cometh of the seed of David, and of the town of Bethlehem, where David was? So there was a division among them because of the people because of him. And some of them would have taken him, but no man laid hands on him. Then came the officers to the chief priests and Pharisees. And they said unto them, why have ye not brought him? And the officers said, never man spake like this man. Then answered the Pharisees, are ye also deceived? Have any of the rulers or the Pharisees believed on him? But this people who knoweth not the law are cursed. Well, let's point out a couple things about this passage. First of all, they started with the false assumption that Jesus was from Galilee, when the Bible says he was born in Bethlehem. Now, he was raised in Galilee, but he was born in Bethlehem. It's interesting also, the Pharisees sent somebody else to go take him. They didn't go themselves. This happens to me at universities all the time when I do debates, or when I speak in colleges, or even speak at churches. Some professor will send his students to the seminar to ask me questions. The professor won't come, but he'll send his students. And when the student comes back feeling defeated because I answered all their questions, the professor will say, well, why didn't you ask him this and this and this? Well, professor, why didn't you come yourself, you coward? If you got some questions, ask them to me, okay? I have a very hard time finding opponents in debates. The guys are smarter than I am, but see, I'm right on this topic and they're wrong. It's very easy to win. So they started with the false assumption that Jesus was supposed to be from Galilee, and they're wrong right there. Then, since the Pharisees had not believed on him, that was used as proof that he was not right. Go back and notice that passage. Have any of the rulers of the Pharisees believed on him? And this argument that when someone says, all scientists believe in evolution, they're using this very same argument. They're going to say, well, obviously creation can't be true because most scientists don't believe in it. Just exactly what the Pharisees did to Jesus. And then they're going to say, since nobody believed in him, he can't be right. And the evolutionists say this very same thing. They'll say, well, do you see any articles on creation in published scientific journals? They're following the exact same trail that they did with the Pharisees. They're using majority opinion, which means nothing. The majority followed Aaron when they rebelled, and they were wrong in Exodus chapter 32. The majority voted not to go into the promised land in Numbers chapter 32. The majority followed false gods in Judges chapter 2. Many times throughout the Old Testament, the majority was wrong. So the fact that the majority of scientists today believe in evolution doesn't prove a thing. First place, I suspect it may not even be true. The majority, only 55%, in one survey, New York Times in 1998, said the majority, 55% believe in evolution. So the majority of people are the ones that killed Jesus, crucified him, nailed him on the cross. The majority of the Roman Empire hated Christians. So majority opinion means nothing as far as determining truth, right and wrong, especially if the majority has a vested interest, like they do in this evolution theory. The majority of scientists taught that the sun circles the earth. They taught heavier objects fall faster. They taught taking your blood out will make you well. History has a long list of things where scientists, the majority of scientists, believe something that was wrong. It does not mean a thing. Many thousands of scientists do believe in creation. All through history, all major branches of science were started by creation scientists, people who believed in creation. Many people have lost their jobs because they have claimed to be a creationist, and so they get fired or lose their funding or don't get their articles published. Robert Gentry, tremendous scientist, did lots of work on radiopolonium halos, lost his grant money because he was a creationist. Roger DeHart, science teacher at Burlington Edison High School in Seattle, Washington, was told he could not inform students of errors in the textbooks. He wasn't even talking about creation. He wasn't even talking about the Bible. He was just saying, they have errors in these textbooks, and here's a more modern scientific journal where this has been proven wrong, and they called him in and said, don't do this, because the kids might not believe in evolution when you get done. I mean, that's just flat discrimination. Some principal ought to be fired for allowing that to happen in his school. Kevin Haley, biology teacher at Oregon Community College, lost his job just because he was exposing errors in the textbooks. They fired him at the college. Baylor University in Waco, Texas, fired William Dembski in April 2000 because he advocated intelligent design. At a former Southern Baptist school, Baylor, Dembski was saying, I think there must have been an intelligent designer, which of course goes against the evolution theory, and so they fired him. Forrest Mims was a science writer for 20 years. He published in National Geographic, in Science Digest, American Journal of Physics, 60 magazines and newspapers. He was denied a job as writer for Scientific American because he was a creationist. There is great discrimination against those who believe in creation. Just like in the Soviet Union 10 years ago, they would discriminate against a capitalist. I've got seven people from the Soviet Union on my staff, one of them running the camera back there. They will tell you, in Soviet Union 10 years ago, if you believed in creation or if you were a Christian, they would not allow you to graduate from high school. You certainly could not go on to college. Then they could say, all college graduates believe in evolution, therefore it must be true, which is a silly argument. A teacher, Rod LeVake in Faribault, Minnesota, was reassigned because he doubted Darwin's theory was true. It took him out of the biology class. So, shall Christ come out of Galilee? Folks, the argument is silly. The majority of people saw Jesus was the Messiah. The Pharisees couldn't see it. And the majority of the population sees creation is the obvious truth. And some of the scientists say, well, it can't be true because we scientists don't believe in it. That is just a ridiculous argument. They're arguing about the wrong subject. The question was not, did Jesus come out of Galilee? That's not the question. Jesus was born in Bethlehem. And scientists today often argue about the wrong topic. They'll say, well, creation can't be proven scientifically, therefore evolution must be true. And you talk about a wild-haired idea. That is one right there. No, you can't prove either view, creation or evolution, scientifically. Both have to be taken by faith. But the obvious evidence is there must have been a designer. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure this out. It says here in John, some of the people would have taken him, but no man laid hold on him. So it follows along with the same kind of thing. If you don't like someone's message, kill the messenger. If the fella comes to bring you a telegram, you know, Western Union telegram, ma'am, and you read the telegram, I don't like that telegram. So you shoot the guy that brought it to you. He's just delivering the message, that's all. And if you don't like the message that God created the world and He's going to be your judge someday, well, then don't get mad at me. Take it out on God. Or get your heart right with God. They said in John 7:45, the officers came, why have you not brought him? Notice they sent their students to take him. They didn't go themselves. And many people who disagree with creation are trying to use the law to silence creation. They will actually try to pass laws to prevent creation going into the textbooks. Or they will try to sue somebody who teaches creation in their class. They can't use logic, so they're going to use the law and make it illegal to teach a certain doctrine. That is just simply not common sense. In verse 47, they answered them, Pharisees, are you also deceived? Let me translate that. Are you stupid? Since we don't believe any of it must not be right, this is exactly what the scientists are doing today. Some scientists are doing with their pupils. Are you so dumb you believed in creation too? And the average student in a public university is going to get all kinds of this kind of scoffing from at least one of his teachers will try to ridicule him if he believes in creation. In other words, all scientists believe in evolution and the scientific journals don't support creation, therefore it must be true. Well, I'll tell you what. Send in an article to a science journal that supports creation. Send in the article that supports creation to a science journal, and it won't be published. It's discrimination. This people which know not the law are cursed, he said in John 7:49. In other words, we have knowledge, you don't. Let me see your degree, please. Nothing has changed, folks. In 2,000 years, they're using the exact same tactic they used on Jesus Christ. He said, doth our law judge any man before it hear him? At least some of the non-believers had common sense enough to realize, hey, there's something to this. And if you're watching this tape or listening here today, and you have the common sense to realize, man, maybe evolution isn't true. Well, yay. Everybody ought to have enough common sense to figure that out. Many scientists down through history have believed in creation. We could start with Francis Bacon back in 1561 when he was born, who developed our scientific method. Johann Kepler, who developed scientific astronomy. Many people, we'll just flash some names up here quickly. All of these folks were creationists. They weren't all biblical, young earth, Bible-believing creationists, though the majority were. And they weren't even all Christians, though many were. But they developed just about every major branch of science that we have today was developed by creationists. There's a great list of these with a lot of detail on them on the Answers in Genesis website, answersingenesis.org, where you can get this list and many other, lots of other good information about scientists who believe in creation. So these fellows all through history were creationists. They were not evolutionists. See, the evolution theory is like a leech. They come in and take over what somebody else has done. They don't produce anything on their own. Major branches of science developed by creationists. Just about everyone we have in the world today. As a matter of fact, some have argued they can't think of anything that the evolution theory has added to real science. The evolution theory has not helped us get to the moon. It didn't help us get computers or calculators. It hasn't done anything. One fellow argued, well, yeah, the evolution theory is how we explain modern medicine with bacteria mutating. Well, duh, it's still a bacteria. Okay? That's not evolution. It's a variation within the same strand. Still a bacteria. So, people say, what about separation of church and state? Can you teach creation in schools? Well, this idea, this idea of separation of church and state is ridiculous. There is no such phrase mentioned in the Constitution. In the Constitution, it says, Congress shall make no law establishing a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It does not say there is separation of church and state. That phrase was used in a letter by Thomas Jefferson to a pastor Danbury, a Baptist in Dayton, Connecticut in 1802. Jefferson said, the First Amendment has erected a wall of separation between church and state. By the way, this is a one-dimensional wall, which means the Congress cannot get involved in the church's business. But to get around that, they've tricked an awful lot of churches into becoming 501c3 corporations. See, the government creates and owns and regulates corporations, not the church. And a true church, a real Bible-believing, true New Testament church, is not incorporated and does not have 501c3 status. Because once you do that, you've put the church under the government. And they do have the authority to regulate you. Get rid of that corporation status and become a real true church, and a lot of your problems will disappear. Like in our ministry, we're a branch of a local New Testament Bible-believing unincorporated church. So when we build a building, we don't get a building permit. We can't, because that would be putting God under the government. Ask the folks at your local county building office, inspectors and stuff, ask them if a federal government came in here, if the federal government came in to build a building like the Navy base here in Pensacola, do you guys at the county inspect the Navy base? And they'll say, no. They have their own inspectors. We have no jurisdiction over them because they're federal. Exactly right. And you have no jurisdiction over a church if it is a real church. Now, for the last 100 years, so many churches have been incorporated, the average building inspector's never heard of that, and it drives them nuts to even consider that just maybe we don't have jurisdiction. But they don't, okay, if it's a real and true New Testament church. Now, churches ought to build their stuff better than the county requires anyway, and we try to at our place, but they simply do not have jurisdiction. Okay, second question. How do we see stars that are billions of light years away? There is no question there are an awful lot of stars out there. The Bible says in Nehemiah, Thou, even thou art Lord alone. Thou hast made the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth and the things that are therein. God created the heavens. Now, according to the evolution theory, stars evolve. It's interesting. Nobody's ever seen one star forming. Some have argued, well, in Crab Nebulae we see some bright spots that we think are stars forming in this nursery that produces stars. Just a minute. You wouldn't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out. It could be you're not seeing a star forming, you're seeing the dust clearing and a star showing that was already behind it. I mean, if this had to go to a court of law, any freshman law student would make that argument, and you couldn't prove that's wrong. So there would certainly be very reasonable doubt that we're not seeing stars forming. Nobody's ever proven a star is forming. But yet there are trillions of stars out there. So if stars really evolve, star births ought to equal star deaths, and yet we don't see that happening. We see stars dying, exploding, burning up, novas and supernovas happen, but that's the opposite of evolution. We never see one form. The Bible says in Genesis chapter 1, God made the stars to be for signs and for seasons here on the earth. So, God made the stars. The Bible says He actually counts the number of the stars. Not only how many there are, but each one has a number, and He knows that number. When the Bible says He numbers the hairs of your head, it doesn't mean He knows how many hairs you have. He means He knows the number of each hair. This is hair number 174,219. He knows the number of every hair. And He knows the number of every star. There are enough stars out there that everybody on earth can own 2 trillion of them to yourself. Plenty to go around. And here we fight over a little bit of real estate. God's got loads of stuff for us out there in heaven. Okay, the Hubble telescope was asked to focus in on a dot. And for 10 continuous days, they spotted this. They looked at this one spot north of the Big Dipper, or above the Big Dipper. This spot is about the size of a grain of sand held at arm's length. After watching it for 10 days, they thought this spot was black. There was nothing there. But after 10 days of continuous viewing, they discovered there are more stars than they could count. In that spot they previously thought had nothing. Now, even the evolutionists, like Stephen Hawking, who hates creationists, Stephen Hawking said, stars are so far away, they appear to us to be just pinpoints of light. We cannot see their size or shape. So how can we tell the different types of stars apart? For the vast majority of stars, there is only one characteristic feature we observe, the color of their light. What he said here is stars are so far away, all we see is the color of their light. We cannot see their size or shape. When you look at the sun through a telescope, of course, you can see the various, flames leaping off and all this kind of stuff. You don't see any of that with stars. You get the biggest telescope in the world, all you see is a dot when you look at a star. You do not see the features of a star, so keep that thought in mind. If you're going to tell the distance to an object you cannot touch, like a star, or across Grand Canyon, the way you tell the distance to something you can't actually go measure, one way to tell the difference is to use trigonometry. I taught high school trig for years. It's not that complicated. If you get 2 observation points looking at a third point, if you know the distance between your observation points, and you know the angle that they form looking toward this third point, you can actually calculate the unknown distance using sine, cosine, or tangent. Simple high school trig, I could teach you how to do it in 15 minutes if you don't know. Well, we got this same problem when you're looking at stars. The Earth is only 8,000 miles in diameter. So if 2 people are on opposite sides of the Earth looking at a star, 8,000 miles is nothing compared to star distance. So we need to get a greater base on our triangle. So what they've done to enlarge the base is they look at the star in January, then they look at the star in June, and you now have a huge base on your triangle. The problem is, the distance from the Sun to the Earth is 93 million miles, which is 8 light minutes. It's called 1 astronomical unit, which means the diameter of our orbit as we circle around the Sun is 16 light minutes. Now, that's a big number if you measure it in miles, but if you measure it in light minutes, it's not that big. This little yellow dot on the far left here represents Earth's orbit around the Sun. 16 light minutes. Now, if you were going to look at a star that was 1 light year away, and apparently none of them are that close, you would have a very skinny triangle even to measure 1 light year, because a year has 525,948 minutes in it. That's about like having 2 surveyors set up their instruments 16 inches apart and focus in on a dot 525,000 inches away. What we're going to do here is translate the light minutes into inches, so the analogy makes sense. Well, 525,000 inches is 8 1/4 miles. Let's get 2 guys up on the roof of the church with transits, powerful telescopes. We're going to park them 16 inches apart. They're going to focus in on a dot 8¼ miles away. Would you agree that would form a very skinny triangle? Real skinny. That is for 1 light year. Now, if you want to measure 100 light years, you have to move your dot 826 miles away. At 1 light year, it gives you an angle of 0.017 degrees. At 100 light years, it's 0.00017 degrees. I don't think that's measurable. Some have argued, though, they can measure 100 light years. Well, I don't think so, but I'd like to see the proof of that. But I'll give them 100. I don't think you can tell exactly where you were 6 months ago on opposite sides of Earth's orbit, for one thing, to establish your other base point to get this exact angle. This textbook says parallax trigonometry can be used to measure distances out to 100 light years. Now, some have argued, oh, we've got better telescopes now. We can go out 1,000 light years. I'd have to be demonstrated. You'd have to prove that to me, but maybe we can, okay? Even if you can measure out 1 billion light years, that still does not prove the universe is 1 billion years old. I mean, you don't need to be a genius to figure this out. If you're seeing a star 1 billion light years away, you would have to assume the speed of light has been the same all through history or all through space. See, a light year is a distance, it's not a time. If something could travel 1 billion light years in 1 second, then it's not a time when you say it's 1 billion light years away. It's a distance, not a time. So some things to consider. Number one, we cannot measure distances accurately beyond 100 light years. And I would even question the 100 as far as accuracy. You start to really get some wild numbers when you get out there. Secondly, nobody knows what light is. We certainly don't know that it's always traveled the same speed. The whole theory behind a black hole is that light can be attracted by gravity. Now, if light can be attracted by gravity, then the speed of light is not a constant. You can't have your cake and eat it too. The light is not a constant. Back in February of '99, Houston Chronicle ran an article telling how some scientists at Harvard had slowed light down to 38 miles an hour by cooling it. Then, they announced in February of 2000 they slowed it down to 1 mile an hour. Then in January of 2001, they totally stopped light. They brought the speed of light to 0, held it there, and then released it, and it took off. The speed of light is not a constant. In Princeton University, they have an article in June of 2000 that says, scientists claim they have broken the ultimate speed barrier, the speed of light. They accelerated light to 300 times the speed of light. Well, if you can speed it up and slow it down, I think it'd be silly to argue that the speed of light has always been a constant all through history or all through space. You just can't know those things. Speed of light was decreased so rapidly. Astronomer Barry Setterfield said, during the past 300 years, at least 164 measurements, separate measurements of the speed of light have been published. 16 different measurement techniques were used. The speed of light has apparently decreased so rapidly that experimental error cannot explain it. No physical law prevents anything from exceeding the speed of light. In 2 published experiments, the speed of light was apparently exceeded by a factor, by as much as a factor of 100. 100 times the speed of light. Here's the graph that Setterfield constructed of all the speed of light information he gathered from the measurements in the last 160 years, and the speed of light has been declining. Now, it appears about 1960 it kind of leveled out, and the speed of light is not declining, at least by the way we're measuring it. That could be because in the early 60s they invented the atomic clock. And the atomic clock measures time based on the wavelength of a cesium-133 atom. So if you're using light to measure light, you don't need to be a genius to figure out you have a rubber ruler problem here. If the speed of light is declining, your clock is declining at exactly the same rate, and you will never observe the speed of light declining. Walt Brown has a great article about this in his book, In the Beginning, which you can get from our ministry or from our website, drdino.com. Dr. Troitsky said the speed of light was 10 billion times faster at time 0. Well, to argue the speed of light has always been a constant is simply not a valid argument. According to the Big Bang Theory, nothing exploded and spread out faster than the speed of light when the galaxies were first created. I don't believe that theory at all, but even they would say, yes, the speed of light was different in the past. Dr. whoever you pronounce his name here, Imperial College of London said, A shocking possibility is that the speed of light might change in time during the life of the universe. Scientists brought it to a full halt. January 18th in the year 2001, researchers slowed light to a dead stop, stored it, and then released it as if it were an ordinary material particle. You can read the article for yourself here, how they stopped light totally. So, number one, I would say, argument number two, we don't know what light is. And we do not know that the speed of light has always been constant. Argument number one is we can't measure those great distances anyway. Argument number three, the creation was mature and finished when God made it. How old was Adam when God made him? 0, right? Did he look 0? I mean, did God make a baby in the garden? Did he make a fertilized egg in the garden? Or did he make a full-grown man in the garden? We made a full-grown man, full-grown woman. Adam could walk, talk, name all the animals, and get married first day. I mean, he's a full-grown person, all right? He already had pre-programmed ability to speak, balance system to walk. Normally, you got to learn those things. You know, Adam could do it right off. God pre-programmed him with all of this stuff. It doesn't work otherwise. And God made a full-grown garden. He didn't hand him a package of seeds and say, here, plant these quick. You're going to need supper. Okay, the trees were already there, fruit already growing on the trees. I mean, after just a couple of days. Trees were made on day 3, Adam made on day 6. This was a mature creation. It just won't work any other way. It's not deceptive on God's part, it's just necessary. There's no other way to do it that I can figure out. And God made a full-grown man, full-grown woman, full-grown garden, and stars already showing with their light. So, I think a lot of people today have a strong tendency to try to put our limitations on God. You know, we can't do it, so God can't do it either. You know, that's just, you got the wrong God is the basic problem. Okay, you ought to get the real God of the Bible who can do anything he wants. Next question. What about the red shift? Doesn't that prove stars are billions of light years away and the universe is billions of years old? And what about these Cepheid variables? Well, when light goes through a prism, it'll bend it and separate the colors of light, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, because the light waves are bent different amounts going through different mediums. They can look at a star through one of these things called a spectroscope, and it'll separate the colors of the starlight out. And it puts black lines on there. And if the black lines are shifted over toward the red, they would assume, wow, that means the star is moving away from us. Now, just hold on a minute. Just because you see lines shifted toward the red, that doesn't prove the star is moving away. It could be moving away. I don't know, and you don't know. But redshift does not prove stars are moving away. Here's the way the theory goes. The Doppler effect is, you hear this in sound. If you're sitting at a train track and a train is coming by, it has a higher pitch as it comes in because it's compressing the sound waves. When it goes past you, the pitch is lowered because the sound waves are being refracted instead of compressed. The theory is that possibly light does the same thing. If a star is moving away, the starlight, as the light waves travel toward us, they would be stretched or separated. And so they think that might cause the red shift. If a star is moving toward us, it would cause a blue shift. That's how the theory goes. Okay? I don't think it's provable, but it's an interesting theory, and it might be true. But it's certainly not documented or proven to be true. There was an early sign that red shifts reliably indicate distances of galaxies. For quasars, however, the diagram shows a wide scatter in apparent brightness at every redshift. In fact, there is little correlation of brightness to redshift at all. Either quasars come in an extremely wide range of intrinsic luminosities, as most people believe, or their redshifts do not indicate distance. So they're taking a little tiny bit of evidence, the redshift, and putting an awful lot of baggage in that one little leaky basket, I think. I don't think redshift proves anything. Thus, for us, the only conclusion that can be drawn is that at least some quasars are relatively nearby, and that a large fraction of their redshift is due to something other than the expansion of the universe. So in the last 60 years, students have all been taught the universe is expanding. And it might be, I don't know. I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I'm just saying we don't know. But the evidence to argue for the expanding universe is the redshift. And then they say, see, because of the redshift, the universe is expanding, and because it's expanding, that means it used to all be together, and that means there was a Big Bang. This is the 4 different steps they take in their illogical trail to conclude that there was a Big Bang. If there was a canopy of water above the atmosphere when God first made it, Adam and Eve might have seen the stars even more clearly than we do today. This may have been a photo amplifier of some kind. Science News in '95 said, another set of observations indicates that the universe appears to be 8.4 to 10.6 billion years old. The new work relied on the Hubble Space Telescope to obtain the distance to faraway galaxies. I'd like to point out, when you go from 8.4 to 10.6, that's what, a 25% error? This is a far cry from an exact science. A team led by some guys in England used a two-step method to estimate the Hubble constant. Well, let me stop right there. How can you estimate a constant? I mean, if this number is one of the multipliers in your equation, any freshman algebra student can tell you, you vary one number, it totally changes the answer. And if you can vary your Hubble constant in your multiplier equation, your age of the universe is going to come out wildly different depending on how you estimate your Hubble constant. The Hubble is not a constant. So they get numbers here. He said, first, they observed a type of standard candle, stars known as Cepheid variables, to find the distance to the spiral galaxy M96. He said, you have to be very careful about drawing conclusions because of the Hubble constant. Measurements have huge systematic errors. I would agree. My point is, we don't know the distance to these stars, and you don't know the age of the universe because of the distance to the stars anyway. Even if they are billions of light years away, even if the universe is infinitely large, maybe there is no end. That still doesn't prove it's billions of years old. God could have made it like that yesterday. He certainly could have done it like he told us in the Bible 6,000 years ago. On page 56, James Jean said, even the nearest Cepheids are so remote that it is difficult to determine their absolute distances with any great accuracy. All large distances in astronomical literature are subject to an error of perhaps 10% from this cause alone. There just are too many errors in here. On page 61, they said, we now know that faintness arises from two causes, distance and absorbing matter in space. And it is not generally possible to apportion it accurately between the two. The Bible says God stretched out the heavens several different times in Scripture. In Isaiah chapter 40, Isaiah chapter 42, in Isaiah chapter 45, it says God stretched out the heavens. In Jeremiah chapter 10, same thing. He stretched out the heavens. So it could be the red shift is being caused by the stretching of the heavens since the creation. It could be it's caused by tired light. Everything else gets tired when they travel a great distance. I do. Maybe light does too. It could be that this is what's causing the red shift in the lines that we're seeing through our spectrograph. It could be the Doppler effect. The stars could be moving away. I don't know. I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying we don't know these things. It could be the light is being slowed down or speeded up by gravity. If the light is going past a galaxy, it's going to speed it up or slow it down. There could be a braking effect, like the black hole idea. When you get into the stars, though, some people get into the worship of the stars called astrology. That is wicked and evil and condemned in Scripture. There is an interesting theory, though. D. James Kennedy, Fort Lauderdale, has written a book called The Real Meaning of the Zodiac, and he and many other people think the original constellations, the 88 constellations up there, told a gospel story. Again, I don't know if this is true or not, but there has been some very interesting research on this, and I'd recommend Christians at least look into it and say maybe they originally told this story. The Bible does talk quite a bit about the constellations. In the book of Job, it tells us about Pleiades, loose the bands of Orion, and Mazzaroth, and Arcturus. So there are constellations mentioned in Scripture. Maybe there's a reason for this. One theory says that the original creation, with Adam and Eve, those folks did not have a Bible, so God gave them the gospel story in the stars. And Adam and Eve could look at the stars and say, oh, wow, the coming Redeemer is coming. We got Virgo the Virgin going to bring forth a son, and he's going to be Libra, weigh us in the balances and find out, who's wanting. And all through this is Draco the Dragon. And that's what the D. James Kennedy's book is about. I think it's very interesting and certainly worth studying. Some Christians get mad at me because they even mention this. They say, oh, no, we don't believe in the gospel in the stars, therefore you shouldn't talk about it. Well, I'm sorry if you don't believe in it. That's just tough. If I start working for you, then I'll do what you say. Meanwhile, I'm going to tell people I think it's worth looking at. Interesting theory to study. There are about 88 constellations that people have recognized. Now, when I look up there, I don't see a bear. I see stars. But apparently, the people who in the old days had this all figured out, it could be this information came from Adam and was passed down, and today has been perverted into the horoscope. Satan always perverts what God does, or tries to. I suspect the horoscope is a perversion of the original gospel in the stars. And some people have argued that the Sphinx in Egypt was given to tell us how to read the gospel story. You start with Virgo the Virgin because the Sphinx has the face of a woman and the body of a lion. And you start with the Virgin and you end with Leo the Lion, just like Jesus Christ. He came as born of Mary the Virgin, and he's going to come back as the Lion of the tribe of Judah to rule and reign with a rod of iron. Okay, next question. Why did God use a flood and not just have all the bad people die? Couldn't God just say, okay, everybody except Noah, die? Oh, yeah, he could have. He can do what he wants. But for one thing, some things to consider. A flood left evidence. A miracle would not. I mean, if God just said everybody die, 10 years later there's no evidence of all this, and people could say, well, I don't believe God did it. The flood left evidence. I mean, all around the world you see evidence of this flood. We cover that on our video number 6. This flood left this evidence to remind us that God hates sin. When I see fossils or canyons, I think, boy, God, you must really hate sin. You go see the huge fossil graveyards and look how many animals and people died. Say, man, God hates sin. Thirdly, by God telling them there's going to be a flood, this gave them a preparation time. They could watch while Noah's building this boat. For 100 years, probably. We don't know how long Noah built the boat. It could have been 100, 120 years. Could have been 10 years. We don't know. A couple of verses seem to indicate probably about 120 years. But it could have been God was doing this so people could see what's going on and they could have time to repent. Whereas with a miracle, there wouldn't be this time. God sometimes does use miracles, like in the book of Jonah. Jonah went and said 40 days and Nineveh is going to be overthrown. Jonah didn't offer any evidence. He just said, here's my word. It's going to happen. And the people did repent. In the case of Noah, they had physical evidence. This guy's building a boat a long ways from water. And they still didn't repent. So, in 1 Peter it tells us, which sometime were disobedient when once the long-suffering of God waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was a-preparing, wherein few, that is, 8 souls, were saved by water. So, here's a verse that tells us God showed his long-suffering while Noah built the boat. So I suspect that may be one of the reasons. Okay, next question. Is the sun shrinking? For quite a few years, creationists used the argument that the shrinking sun proves the earth is not billions of years old. I think it is still a valid argument. I do not use it in my seminar, part 1 about the age of the earth, because there are so many other good evidences. The problem is nobody's positive of what's causing the sun to burn. There are 2 theories about what causes the sun to burn. One theory says the sun is burning by nuclear fusion, in which case it could burn for billions of years and you wouldn't see much change in the diameter because a small amount of matter produces an enormous amount of heat. The other theory says the sun is burning by gravitational collapse. It is just, burning up, and the pressure produces the heat to keep it burning. All we know is we've observed the sun for several hundred years, ever since trigonometry was developed, and we've observed the sun is shrinking. Both in polar diameter and equatorial diameter, the sun is getting smaller. Now, it does seem to oscillate up and down. It swells and contracts and swells and contracts, but the overall general trend is toward shrinking. This is what's observed. Now, if somebody wants to assume that, well, maybe this is just, part of a bigger trend and it used to be getting larger in the past, you could assume that, but you don't have scientific data to back it up. Secondly, it's never been observed. Nobody's ever seen this. And thirdly, you got a problem of where's this extra material come from? All you got to do is step outside and look up. Obviously, the sun is burning. It's losing 5 million tons every second. You can't just keep losing 5 million tons a second. Pretty soon you start to lose weight. And so the sun is losing this mass, 5 million tons every second, which means it used to be larger. And it used to be more massive. If you increase the mass of the sun going backwards in time for several billion years, you start to create a problem with the gravitational balance between the earth and the sun. It's going to suck the earth in and destroy everything. So those who would like us to believe it's 4.6 billion years old, I think have a very serious problem. I don't know. The shrinking sun might only limit it down to a few billion years. I don't know. But it certainly is obvious the sun is shrinking. Okay, a couple of more questions here. What about carbon dating? I get asked this question all the time. So let me explain how carbon dating works, tell you the assumptions involved in it, and tell you the problems associated with it, and give you some false dates that are frequently obtained with carbon dating. Here's how it works. The Earth is surrounded by an atmosphere. The atmosphere is about 100 miles thick. The atmosphere that we're breathing contains mostly nitrogen, 21% oxygen, 0.06% carbon dioxide, and that's what plants breathe, and 0.0000765% radioactive carbon-14. This radioactive carbon-14 mixes with oxygen and becomes carbon dioxide. Plants are breathing carbon dioxide. The theory is that probably the sun producing this carbon-14 in the upper atmosphere it's going to be mixed in because of normal wind currents. You know, thermal and convection currents are going to mix it in. So probably it's equally mixed, though we don't know that. The sun is producing carbon-14. What happens is radiation strikes the atmosphere and converts nitrogen into carbon-14. See, nitrogen has an atomic weight of 12. 7 protons, 7 neutrons, and 7 electrons whizzing around. And when the sunlight hits it, knocks a few things apart, and it turns into carbon-14. Now, carbon-14 is radioactive. Normally, carbon is atomic number 6, which gives it a weight of 12. And so, since the nitrogen has now been changed into carbon-14, it is an unstable radioactive isotope. Which means, it doesn't mean it listens to the radio a lot. It means it is radioactive. You can pick it up with a Geiger counter. It's going to break down and fall apart. Through extensive testing, they have estimated that carbon-14 has a half-life of about 5,730 years. Some people have argued, oh no, it's 5,690, and some say 5,780. You know, the numbers range around that figure, but let's get the main point here. Carbon-14 appears to have a half-life, which means half of it will break down in that amount of time, roughly 6,000 years. In theory, it never really goes to zero. It goes from 100% to 50%, and then it goes to 25% in one more half-life. Since plants are breathing in this carbon dioxide, during photosynthesis, plants make carbon part of their tissue. Plants breathe off oxygen, but they keep the carbon. It becomes part of the leaf and stem and fruit of the plant. Animals come along and eat the plants. During your lifetime, you probably have eaten plants or eaten animals that ate plants. I don't know what else is there out there to eat. That's all I've ever eaten in my life, okay, is one of those two things. So all of us have some carbon in us because we got it from the plants, radioactive carbon. The plants are breathing it in all the time, and when the plant dies, it stops taking in any new carbon. It is assumed that the amount in the plant then is going to be the same ratio as the amount in the atmosphere. See, most of the carbon is carbon-12. A little tiny bit is carbon-14. Very small percentage is carbon-14. It is assumed that since the atmosphere is 0.0000765%, then they would say, well, then the plants must be 0.0000765%, and the animals must be the same. Well, I don't know if it's never been proven, but it's a reasonable theory, and I will give them that. It probably is true. When the plant or animal dies, he stops breathing and stops taking in new C14, so whatever they had begins to decay, and half of it will leave in 5,730 years. Then if you wait 5,730 more years, it'll be down to 1/4, and then down to 1/8, and then down to a 16th, and in theory it never goes to zero, but after 5 or 6 half-lives, you can't measure it. So even if nothing else was wrong, carbon dating would only work for about 30 to 40,000 years. So if somebody tells you, we know the Earth is billions of years old because of carbon dating, right away you can rest assured they don't have a clue what they're talking about. Even if it worked, it would only work for 30 or 40,000 years. It would not work for billions of years. After 30 or 40,000, it's so close to zero you can't measure it. So they compare the amount of C14 in the atmosphere to C12, and they get a ratio. Then they compare the same things found in the fossil that you're trying to carbon date, and they can estimate how long it's been dead. If the fossil has half as much carbon-14 as the atmosphere does, you'd say, oh, it's been dead for 5,730 years. Well, this all sounds good. This was invented in 47 to 53 by Willard Libby, University of Chicago. But there are some obvious assumptions that throw everything off. Okay? Number one, has the amount of C14 in the atmosphere always been the same? This is a serious problem for those who believe in carbon dating because atmospheric carbon is increasing as long as the sun is putting it in. It's sort of like filling a barrel. If I told you, I said, brother, I want you to fill this barrel full of water, but I drilled holes in the side. As you're filling the barrel, it's leaking out. Sort of like your checkbook, okay? You keep putting it in and it keeps leaking out. How many know what I'm talking about with the checkbook analogy? Well, the sun is producing carbon-14 and it's leaking out through decay. If you're filling a barrel with water, at some point you're going to reach a stage called equilibrium. You will never fill the barrel past that point unless you increase the input or decrease the outgo. But if all other factors stay the same, the barrel is going to stay at that level. You will not get it to go any higher. It has been estimated that the Earth would take about 30,000 years to reach equilibrium. What that means is if you took a brand new planet Earth, stuck it out in the solar system, sunlight would start producing carbon-14 and it would start decaying. In 30,000 years, it would equalize. Well, when they first invented carbon dating, they said, well, hey, we know the Earth is billions of years old. Mistake number one. Therefore, we can ignore the equilibrium problem. Mistake number two. It has now been discovered carbon-14 is still not in equilibrium. There is more today than there was 10 years ago, which proves the Earth is less than 30,000 years old. So carbon-14 is kind of a complicated proof that the Earth is not billions of years old. Here's a simplified version of how it works. If you tested an animal that was alive, if you took a sample of your body and tested it for carbon-14, it should give you about 16 clicks on your Geiger counter. Click, click, click per minute. That would mean it is 0 years old. If you're only getting 8 clicks per minute, you would say it is 5,730 years old. If you're only getting 4 clicks per minute, it's apparently been through 2 half-lives. It is now 11,460 years old. 2 clicks per minute gives you 17,190 years old. This is a calibration curve. So if you dug up a fossil and you found out it's giving you 3 clicks per minute, you just get your graph and you line it up on 3 and measure down and say, oh, that's about, 14,000 years old. This is how it's supposed to be done. Obviously, a freshman law student could take this apart in a few minutes in a court of law. But if you walked into a room and found a candle burning on a table, and I asked you the question, when was it lit? You say, I don't know, it was burning when I got here. Okay, well then let's figure out the height of the candle. Let's do some empirical science, okay? We're going to measure the height. We could do that very scientifically. Let's say the candle is 7 inches tall. We all agree, we get in the super fancy micrometers and we measure the candle. Everybody agrees, 7 inches tall. Who can tell me when it was lit? Well, let's do some more science. Let's measure how fast it's burning. We're going to watch the candle burn and measure it. We time it precisely with Olympic stopwatches, and we find out it is burning 1 inch per hour. Now who can tell me when it was lit? The candle is 7 inches tall, exactly. It's burning 1 inch per hour, exactly. When was it lit? Anybody got a clue? Nope. Now you're going to have to make a few assumptions. Number one, how tall was the candle? And number two, has it always burned at the same rate? We don't know either of those. And the same thing with carbon dating. When you find a fossil in the dirt, you dig up the bones and you can tell the amount of C14. That can be measured extremely precisely. And you can measure how fast it's decaying at the present. Just like your burning candle, though, that's about all the evidence you're going to get. Now you have to make assumptions. How much C14 was in the atmosphere when that object was alive? In other words, how tall was the candle? And has it always burned at the same rate? We don't know either of those. If the Bible is correct and the Earth had a canopy of water overhead, like we cover on video number 2 of our series, then there was probably very little C14 in the original atmosphere because it would protect it from UV light getting through. So they might have started off with 4 clicks per minute when they're 0 years old. If you wait 5,000 years and dig it up as a fossil, it's going to have 2 clicks per minute, and you're going to assume that it is 17,000 years old when it's only 4,000. I'll give you a few examples of carbon dating and how it doesn't work, and you can see for yourself. Living mollusk shells were carbon dated 2,300 years old. Hello, they're still alive. They can't be 2,300 years old. A freshly killed seal, carbon dated at 1,300 years old. They just killed it. Shells from living snails were carbon dated 27,000 years old. One atheist told me, yes, and we know now why we got the wrong date on that one. Okay. how do you know the other dates you've gotten are correct? You know this one's wrong and you know why it's wrong, but why can you claim other ones that you've gotten are correct? You can't claim that. One part of a mammoth was 29,000 years old, another part's 44,000 years old. They found several mammoths and carbon dated them and got all kinds of wild numbers. Dima, the baby mammoth, one part was 40,000, another part's 26,000, and the wood next to it is only 9,000 years old. The lower leg of a mammoth found in Fairbanks Creek, Alaska, was 15,000 years old. The skin was 21,000 years old. Obviously, we have a problem here. Now, this was 1949 when carbon dating was first invented, back in 1947, 48, 49. And they were getting wild numbers back then, and they're still getting wild numbers today. It hasn't changed. Two mammoths were dated, and one mammoth was 22,000 years old, another one 16,000 years old. And they're found side by side, dated 1992. Living penguins will carbon date about 8,000 years old. Material from layers where dinosaurs are found, carbon dated at 34,000 years old. I thought dinosaurs lived 70 million years ago. A couple of Russian scientists carbon dated dinosaur bones at 30,000 years old. A guy from Ohio had some dated at 20,000 years old, only because he did not tell them they were dinosaur bones. If he would have brought in the dinosaur bone and said, I want you to carbon date this, they would say, oh no, this is a dinosaur bone, it's too old. What he did, he brought in a bone sample and said, would you please date this? I don't know what it is. They said, yeah, 20,000. Now see, that proves it's not a blind test. Carbon dating, the people who do it are very prejudiced based on the geologic column, which we'll get into in a minute. At Berkeley University, Carl Swisher used the most advanced techniques to date human fossils. Last spring, he was reevaluating Homo erectus skulls found in Java in the 1930s by testing sediment found with them. A hominid species assumed to be an ancestor of Homo sapien, erectus was thought to have vanished 250,000 years ago. Even though he used two different dating methods, Swisher kept making the same startling find. The bones were 53,000 years at most, and possibly no more than 27,000 years, a stretch in time contemporaneous with modern humans. I'd like to point out the obvious. The difference between 27,000 and 53,000 is a 96% error. Now, this is one of the most advanced dating centers we have. And if they're getting a 96% error, how long would this evidence last in court? You wouldn't need to be a genius to say, folks, this doesn't work. All right? Here's some things to consider with carbon dating. Number one, if you date a sample of known age, it generally does not work. But if you date a sample of unknown age, it is assumed to work. That's not science. That's not common sense. Okay? As the elements decay, they produce helium. This helium slowly escapes through the rocks into the atmosphere. Very little is able to escape into space. After all factors are considered, the helium in the atmosphere indicates the Earth is less than 2 million years old. Interesting. Nobody's ever been able to fully answer the helium escape problem for the Earth. There's a great book, if you want all the technical stuff on carbon dating and potassium dating, available from ICR, called The Mythology of Modern Dating Methods. You can get it from icr.org if you want more on that. Actually, fossils are dated by the strata they are found in. They are not dated by carbon dating. This fellow says, ever since William Smith at the beginning of the 19th century, fossils have been and still are the best and most accurate method of dating and correlating the rocks in which they occur. Apart from very modern examples, which really are archaeology, I can think of no cases of radioactive decay being used to date fossils. So if somebody tells you they date fossils by radioactive dating, by carbon dating, you say, no, you're mistaken. They date them by which layer they come from. The whole thing is based on this geologic column, which is baloney. It doesn't exist anywhere in the world except in the textbooks. Radiometric dating is not possible if the geologic column had not been erected first. This fellow says the rocks do date the fossils, but the fossils date the rocks more accurately. Well, hello. It's based on circular reasoning. We cover lots more on that in video number 4. A couple of more here and we'll quit. This article says, in the last 2 years, an absolute date has been obtained for the Gandong beds above the Trentel beds. It has the very interesting value of 300,000 years, plus or minus 300,000 years. So they don't know, okay, how old it is. Moon rocks were brought back, and they were carbon dated, not carbon dated, but used potassium argon, other kinds of dating methods on them. One specimen, rock specimen number 10017, was divided into 6 pieces and dated many times. The ages ranged from 2.5 billion to 4.6 billion. Again, about a 90% error from the same rock. I called James Dawson. He's the one who worked at NASA, Chief of Engineering and Operations at Lunar and Earth Science Division at the Manned Spacecraft Center at NASA in Houston. He worked on lunar samples, including the Genesis rock. He told me they found ages from 10,000 years to several billion years in the same rock. Well, they don't know how old the moon is, folks, or anything else. Actually, back in 1969, they were teaching the kids the moon is 3.5 billion years old. Today, they say it's 4.5 billion years old. They gained a billion years just in 30 years. There's a great chapter in the end of this book called Bones of Contention, a great chapter dealing with the dating game and how they change the dates whenever the need arises. So what about potassium argon dating? Well, potassium has a much longer half-life. Half of it decays in 1.3 billion years. Now, of course, nobody watched it for 1.3 billion years. They watch it for 3 days in the laboratory and see how many molecules break apart, and then they extrapolate how long it would take for half of it to break apart. So the half-life is an extrapolation based on a 3 or 4 day test. Even though that sounds fishy, and it maybe is, I'll give them that, okay? We won't argue about the extrapolation for the half-life. We're going to assume you've accurately measured it. They will date a layer of lava or ash because it is supposed to reset the clock every time the volcano erupts. It's supposed to have 0 argon. It should all be potassium. Potassium then changes to argon. And so what they do, they look at the Earth and find different layers of ash where there's been a volcanic eruption. They will date the layers of ash, and any fossils found in between should be between those 2 numbers. This is how it's supposed to work. The KBS tuff had been dated, named for K. Brenzenmeyer, was dated using potassium argon dating, and everybody said it was 212 to 230 million years old. This is back in 1970. Now watch this. In 1970, many people dated this layer of ash, and everybody agreed it's somewhere between 212 and 230 million. Some people would publish articles and say, oh no, it's 217 billion or million years old. Others would say, oh no, it's 229. You know, they would argue, but the arguments always were in that range, or else their article probably wouldn't get published. Well, then along comes Richard Leakey and messes everything up by finding a perfectly normal human skull under the KBS tuff. Well, if you've got a layer of ash 212 million years old and you find a normal skull under that, with no evidence of it being added later like a burial, you got a problem. So some people would say, see, this proves man was here 212 million years ago. Others would say, no, maybe this proves these layers are not different ages. They found this skull, KNMER 1470, found in 1972, under the KBS tuff by Richard Leakey. It looks like modern humans, but was dated at 2.9 billion years old. So, of course, they had to redate the KBS tuff. Had they not found that skull, nobody ever would have questioned the date of the KBS tuff. But because this skull messed everything up, they had to redate the tuff. They took 10 samples, dated it again, and now they got numbers from 0.5 million to 2.6 million. First of all, that's way down from 212 million. Secondly, that is a 500% error. They don't know the age of those things. Back in 1770, they were teaching the students the Earth might be 70,000 years old. By 1905, the official age of the Earth was 2 billion years old. In 1969, when they went to the moon, the official age of the Earth was 3.5 billion years old, published in all the papers and textbooks. Today, the students are taught it's 4.6 billion years old. Looks to me like the Earth's getting older, about 21 million years per year. That's about 40 years per minute. We are aging rapidly, folks. Things to consider about potassium argon dating. Wild dates are frequently obtained. The dates that don't fit the evolutionary theory are rejected and not published. Only correct dates are published, since they match the geologic column. It's based on the assumptions that the original content of the sample is known, the decay rate never changes, the sample's not been contaminated. And I'd like to point out, by the way, all decays are an indication of downhill trend, not evolutionary increasing complexity. Nobody's got an example of increasing complexity without enormous energy input. They dated ash from Mount Etna in Sicily. I climbed Mount Etna when I was out there, or climbed part of it. It erupted in 122 BC, but the lava gave a potassium argon age of 250,000 years old, when they knew it's only 2,000 years old. In 1801, Hawaiian volcanic lava flow gave a potassium argon age of 1.6 million, yet it's only 200. A volcano in Hawaii erupted in 1959, gave a potassium argon age of 8.5 million years old. They took another sample from Mount Etna in Sicily, erupted 1964, but this time it gave a potassium argon age of 700,000 years old. The 1972 eruption gave an age of 350,000 years. The new lava dome building inside Mount St. Helens started building in 1982. They took samples of it, of the lava. They got numbers when they dated it, between 350,000 and 2.8 million. It's just formed in the last 25 years, folks. So same thing with potassium argon. When you date a sample of known age, it doesn't work. If you date a sample of unknown age, they assume it works. That's not science. And again, wild dates are frequently obtained. So, question. Have fresh dinosaur bones been found? Interesting question. In Alaska, there's a book you can get called The Great Alaskan Dinosaur Adventure, where they talk about dinosaur bones being found, not even fossilized. The journal of Science, December 93, reported amazing preservation of the bones of a young duck-billed dinosaur found in Montana. Under a microscope, the fine structure of the bones was seen to have been preserved to such an extent that cell characteristics could be compared with cells of the chicken bone. In northwestern Alaska, 1961, a geologist found a bed of dinosaur bones in unfossilized condition. A young Canadian Eskimo was working with scientists in Newfoundland's Memorial University in 1987 on Bylot Island. He found part of a lower jaw of a duck-billed dinosaur. It too was in fresh condition. So yes, unfossilized dinosaurs have been found. A dinosaur was found here recently that said it had the heart inside, and it was a 4-chambered heart. Well, I don't think they're really positive it had a 4-chambered heart yet, but even if it did, it doesn't prove anything. Most reptiles have a 3-chambered heart. Birds have 4. So some have argued that dinosaurs turned to birds, which is a ridiculous idea. We covered that on video number 4. But they're using this as evidence that, this proves dinosaurs turned to birds. It is interesting. Very rarely do soft tissues, like hearts and lungs, fossilize, but occasionally they do, which to me is indication there was a flood. Had to be buried quickly, or it would have rotted in just a short time. Okay, next question. If there really was a flood, where'd all the human bones go? Fair question. Marvin Lubenow, one of the world's experts on fossils of humans, says about 4,000 human fossils have been found, most of them very fragmentary, sometimes only a small piece, but he says about 4,000. Here's my solution to this question. When God first made the world, about 6,000 years ago, there were 2 people, but the earth was full of animals and full of plants. When the flood came, 4,400 years later, the earth is still full of animals and still full of plants, but still not full of people. So when the flood came, there weren't as many people to be killed as there were animals, so they would be less likely to be found. Secondly, people lived longer back in those days and probably grew much larger. The purpose of the flood was to destroy mankind. And people are smarter than animals. Well, some people are smarter than some animals. And they would tend to avoid drowning till the last minute. So they wouldn't be fossilized because they would end up on top and they rot. They don't end up buried where they can be preserved. The Bible says there were giants in the earth in those days. If people before the flood were larger, much larger than today, then because of the evolutionary preconceived idea that some people have, they wouldn't recognize these as human bones because they're simply too big. You find a fragment of a huge bone, they would say, well, it must be, a giant sloth or a dinosaur or something else. And it could be. But I think there's a prejudice to thinking that man used to be smaller and now we're bigger. Therefore, if you find small human bones, that's fine. But if you find big human bones, they're not human. So basically, number one, there were less people to be killed. Number two, people would tend to not rot because they end up on top instead of buried because they're smarter. Number three, they might not be recognized as human. And the purpose of the flood was to destroy man. Okay? Next question. Where did Noah get pitch? Isn't it from post-flood oil? On my debate number 7, I debated against a former preacher turned atheist. One of his arguments was, the Bible says Noah put pitch on the ark, and pitch is made from oil. Therefore, oil formed during the flood, and so the creationists have a problem because this can't be true. Well, now the Bible says in Genesis chapter 6, God told Noah to pitch it within and without with pitch. In Exodus chapter 2, the little ark that Moses was hid in was daubed with slime and pitch, and she put the child therein. In Isaiah chapter 34, it says, the streams thereof shall be turned into pitch, and the dust into brimstone, and the land shall become burning pitch. It shall not be quenched day nor night, the smoke thereof shall go up forever. So pitch apparently produces smoke when it burns. If you get an old dictionary, you'll find before they even discovered oil, or started using commercial drilling for oil in the early 1800s, 1820s and 30s, like Pennsylvania oil wells, one of the first ones that they were using. For one thing, nobody had cars back then, so oil was not in big demand. The only use for oil was in lamps to burn, and so they were using whale oil for that generally. But in 1928, the dictionary would say, pitch is a thick, tenacious substance, the juice of a species of pine or fir. So you take pine or fir trees, you get the juice, you distill it down, and you make pitch. There were entire industries in the 1700s and 1800s producing pitch from trees to use for ships to waterproof them. So it's not made from oil. First mistake. When kept long in fusion with vinegar, it becomes dry and brown and forms some other stuff. It's the resin of pine or turpentine. It's used in caulking ships and paying the sides and bottom. Webster's 1828 dictionary. So, the argument that they couldn't have pitch to build the ark because pitch is made from oil is a flawed argument. So, next question. Was ancient man primitive? I don't think so. There's a great book on this available from our ministry called The Puzzle of Ancient Man. If you want to read about some amazing things found indicating ancient man was incredibly intelligent. This little airplane was found in a South American grave, estimated to be about 1,000 years old. The Smithsonian has it labeled as a stylized insect. Does that look like an insect, anybody out here? Looks like an airplane to me. Oftentimes, we get the false idea that ancient man was dumb and modern man is smart, which is all part of the evolution theory. Quite the opposite is true. Ancient man was incredibly intelligent. This iron pot was found inside a lump of coal. They have stones in Peru that weigh 20,000 tons. The biggest crane on earth today can lift 3,000 tons. How did they move a 20,000-ton stone into place? Nobody has a clue how it was done. But they did it, okay? And they fit so tightly together, even today you still can't get a piece of paper in between a lot of these walls. This bell was found inside a lump of coal. We'll cover lots more on that on video number 6, about human artifacts found in coal. This zinc and silver vessel found in solid rock, supposed to be 600 million years old. They found a sunken ship in the Aegean Sea, which is near Greece, part of Greece and that area. Inside the sunken ship was an analog computing device. The ship sank about 100 BC. It's in the National Science Foundation now. A computer on board a ship 2,000 years old. And you think ancient man was dumb and modern man is smart? The hammer that was found in New London, Texas, 1934, Battelle Laboratories said it's 96% iron, 2.6% chlorine, 0.74% sulfur. No carbon, and yet it is stainless steel. It won't rust. They knew how to make that long before the flood. This battery was found in Iraq, supposed to be 2,000 years old. They had electricity a long time ago. One of the Egyptian hieroglyphics shows mummies connected to wires going to some kind of generator. Apparently they used electricity during the Egyptian times. They certainly knew how to do brain surgery. Oftentimes human skulls are found where they had cut holes in them to work on the brain or let out the evil spirits or whatever, and the hole healed shut, proving the guy survived the surgery. This metallic sphere was found with 3 lines around it. It's found in Precambrian material, supposed to be 2.8 billion years old, obviously worked by humans for some reason. A fulsome blade embedded in a lower surface of travertine crust from Sandia Cave, New Mexico. The layer of travertine is said to be 250,000 years old, and yet there's a piece of, like an arrowhead or something, stuck in it. On the right, you see the mortar and pestle found in a mine under tertiary deposits 30 to 50 million years old in California. All sorts of things were found in underneath this layer of lava. It's supposed to be 30 million years old. Now, the layer is not 30 million years old. That's the whole problem. Okay? What appeared to be a standard geode was picked up in California. Fossil shells encrusting its surface are at least 500,000 years old. This object came to be known as the Coso artifact. The names of the people who found the artifact were listed right here for you. They found the item in 1961 on a mountain 4,300 feet high, 340 feet above the dry Owens Lake, 6 miles northeast of Alancha, California. Geologists think it's about 1,000 years old. Owens Lake was as high as the top of that peak. 1,000 years ago, it was that high. No professional scientist has ever investigated the artifact, even though it has been found to be magnetic. It is quite similar technologically to a modern-day ceramic superconductor capacitor. These little metal shavings were found, nanotechnology artifacts in Upper Pleistocene, supposed to be 2 million years old, discovered in the Ural Mountains in Russia. The report, Central Scientific Russian Institute for Geology and Prospecting of Precious Metals, emphasizes the possibility of an extraterrestrial origin. In other words, somebody came from outer space and left these here. Real tiny, beautifully designed artifacts in metal, but the rock's supposed to be too old. The size of these range from a maximum ½ inch, 1.2 inches, down to an incredible 0.003 millimeters, 1/10,000th of an inch. Exact measurements of these, often microscopically small objects, have shown that the dimensions of the spirals are in the so-called golden mean ratio. Now that's interesting. The Greeks built a lot of their buildings using this golden mean ratio. The length of the height and the width are a certain ratio, 1.6 to 1. The golden mean ratio is used all through nature. If you watch the Disney movie Fantasia, which teaches all sorts of evolution, I think you'll see it mentioned in there. Disney had a movie for years available about the golden mean ratio with Mickey or Donald Duck or something, showing how this ratio is found in the curve of a ram's horn, in the way a shell grows, in the way pine cones grow. It's found all over nature. It is aesthetically beautiful to the eyes. The Parthenon is built with the golden mean ratio. And here these articles that are found have the golden mean ratio in them. Since ancient classical times, this fraction has been the iron rule in architecture and geometry. Its usefulness is the fact that a certain length is divided into 2 using this ratio. The length of the original length of the larger piece is the same as the larger piece to the smaller piece. And you can go into all the details on the golden mean ratio if you want to get into that. Here they found these interesting articles found. There's a website telling all about it. They're supposed to be dated 100,000 years old. I'm sorry. I think they happened to find something that was made pre-flood by the people who were living to be 900 years old. You could learn a lot in 900 years. Plus, you can talk to your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. He's still alive. He can teach you things. Plus, Adam came pre-programmed from the hand of God. He probably knew an awful lot of stuff. And Adam walked and talked with God for maybe 100 years. God was his teacher. I think they were incredibly advanced back then. Now, as far as why we don't find evidence of that civilization, I think we do find evidences of it. But people say, well, if there was a flood, why don't we find their houses and their cars? Well, if you live in a perfect world, with everything growing right on your property, you don't need a car. You don't need to go anywhere. You don't need a house. You got perfect weather. I think if you look at what the Bible teaches, the pre-flood world had just about everything just right, except for the people messing it up. And so you wouldn't need the things we have today. Okay, next question. What about the Great Pyramid? Now I get, one guy's got a radio program. He's blasted me 3 times on his program saying, Hovind doesn't know what he's talking about because he mentions the Great Pyramid and teaches pyramidology. I do not teach pyramidology. I think it's an interesting study, and I get asked the question, so I'll answer it. Okay? The Great Pyramid in Egypt is the largest by far of the pyramids. All the rest of the other pyramids found, and thousands have been found around the world, 67 just in Egypt. All the other pyramids are loaded with hieroglyphics. This is King Herman, the greatest guy that ever lived, blah, blah, blah. The Great Pyramid doesn't have any of this. That building is gigantic. Some people have argued, and I think it's an interesting study, that the pyramid might be what's referred to in Isaiah chapter 19, when it says there's an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt and a pillar at the border thereof. And it's a sign for a witness, and a witness to the Lord, to the host of Egypt. It could be the pyramid was built before the flood and is the only structure to survive the flood. It could be the pyramid was built after the flood in Noah and was built by those people who were still living to be 400 years old. And they were trying to preserve some of this incredible knowledge. The pyramid contains some amazing mathematical ratios. You can find the value of pi, 3.14159, to many decimal places using the ratios found in the pyramid. Just a really incredible building. If you look at the pyramid diagram here, you'll see there's a shaft coming in from the right, shaft A. That's called the broad way that leads down to the pit. You can decide if you want to take the narrow way that goes up to the king's chamber. And some have argued this is symbolic of the broad way and the narrow way in the life today. You can take the broad way like everybody else and go to hell, or you can take the narrow way and end up in the king's chamber. And they've done all these measurements about the Grand Gallery and think it may be symbolic that each pyramid inch might represent a certain number of years and that there's things marked off historically. I don't know. I've read lots of books on it. Some really wild cults have arisen around this topic, but that doesn't mean they're wrong on everything they teach just because they believe some stuff that's crazy. If you get to the 50th row of stones, you end up on the king's chamber. 50 is the year of Jubilee. In the king's chamber, you find an empty tomb. The sides of the pyramid were covered by 144,000 casing stones. In Revelation chapter 7, it talks about the 144,000 that are going to be sealed. And these casing stones on the pyramid were sealed together, actually glued together. Sealed. That's why some argue it was waterproof and it survived the flood. I don't know. Inside, you find the empty granite tomb. No evidence of any body decomposing in there. And it may be symbolic of the tomb of Jesus Christ. So, 144,000 casing stones, the broad way and the narrow way. It is 90 times the volume of the Sears Tower, the Great Pyramid is, a massive building. Largest stone on earth. The top stone was never installed. The last rock to finish the building, and they didn't finish it. The cornerstone was never installed. Kind of strange. Some people argue, well, Jesus Christ is the chief cornerstone, and this pyramid is symbolic of what God's going to do on the earth. Jesus Christ is called the head of the corner. He's the stone that the builders rejected. Luke chapter 20 talks about the stone that the builders rejected has become the head of the corner. Daniel chapter 3 talks about the stone cut out of the mountain without hands that smote the image on the feet. And it could be that this is symbolic of Jesus Christ. Noah Hutchings has a great book on the Great Pyramid. He's one of those who believes that it is indeed symbolic of Christian testimony or something like that. Fascinating reading. Of course, Satan always uses what God does, and some have argued that on the back of the dollar bill, the pyramid is a satanic symbol because it has 13 rows of stones representing the 13 degrees of the Blue Lodge or the Masonic Lodge. That again gets into another entirely interesting but different story about the symbol. Some have argued, oh no, the symbol is a godly symbol because godly men did this. Some say, no, it's a satanic symbol. I don't know, study it out for yourself and see what you think. Next question. Was the earth ever a hot, molten mass? The textbook says the earth was a hot, molten mass and it cooled down and there were large pools of bubbling lava. But the Bible says in Genesis 1, when God made the earth, the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So here we have a direct conflict. Somebody is wrong. Either the earth was created under water, which means it was cool, or it was created hot, like the textbook says. Well, the evidence indicates the Bible is correct. Robert Gentry wrote this book, Creation's Tiny Mysteries. A great book. There's his phone number and address if you want to get a hold of him. His website is halos.com. And you can get a hold of Robert Gentry and see his evidence on radiopolonium halos. I went and met with Dr. Gentry, went down to his laboratory, and Got to see some of his radiopolonium halos through the microscope when I met with him back in March of the year 2000. What happened, polonium has a very short half-life. When it decays, pieces fly off. It's sort of like a hand grenade going off underwater. These pieces are all going to fly a certain distance depending upon what element is breaking apart. The polonium has a very short half-life. Somewhere from 3 minutes all the way down to 0.164 seconds. 164 thousandths of a second. Which means within a few minutes all of it's going to be gone. Now if you exploded a hand grenade underwater, the fragments fly out into a sphere, and within a moment they begin to crumble and the sphere disappears. If I told you I want you to explode a hand grenade underwater and then freeze the lake so fast that it preserves the sphere. Of course, that's impossible to freeze a lake that quick, but if you could, you would have a halo, a ring of the hand grenade fragments. Well, that's what we have with polonium. Here we know it has a short half-life, but we know these halos are found in granite. Well, that proves the rock was never a hot molten mass, because if it was a hot molten mass, it would have disappeared. The preserved polonium halos are proof positive the Earth was not a hot molten mass. It was created cold, just like the Bible says. So God's Word is right. Next question. What about global warming? Is the Earth getting warmer? Well, the best book I've seen on this topic is this one here, available from Derry Brownfield, my friend in Missouri. The book is called Facts Not Fear. He says, not Derry, but these folks say in the book, look, the environmental movement is a lot of smoke and a little bit of fire. Yes, man has hurt the environment, there's no question, okay. But number one, is the government the one to fix it? Show me anything the government has fixed. Or do they have an ulterior motive here? Could it be it goes along with the Communist Manifesto, plank number 1? Karl Marx said, the first thing you do to destroy a country is you abolish private property. I'm convinced most of the environmental movement is falling into the trap of supporting communist plank number 1. They don't really want to save the environment. They want to abolish private property. They want you to have to get a permit to cut down a tree on your own property. That's the real purpose behind the environmental movement, in my humble opinion. Next question. Doesn't the Green River Formation prove the Earth is millions of years old? I get this question quite often, actually, because the Green River Formation in Montana, Wyoming, this area out there in the northwest, contains millions of layers of rock, real fine layers. And they will argue these layers represent a different year. Each one is a different year because of the pollen grains found in these layers. One pollen's only produced in the summer, a different pollen's only produced in the fall. And therefore, each of these must represent a year. And since there are millions of them, it must prove the Earth is millions of years old. Well, it all sounds good, but it's simply not true. Take a piece of Green River Formation rock, grind it back up into powder, and just sprinkle it in moving water. It'll automatically sort it into many layers. Have you ever seen those things you buy at the store with two pieces of glass with the sand in between? You flip it over and it makes all these fancy designs inside. Why does it automatically layer things? Well, that's called hydrologic sorting. I mean, you would think if the black sand is denser than the white sand, why doesn't it all go to the bottom and the white all go to the top? Why is it distinct layers? Green River Formation formed very quickly in the flood in the days of Noah. When they drill down through the Green River Formation, they find different things called event horizons, like a layer of ash. A volcano blew up, spread a layer of ash over everywhere. Then the layers form. Then you get another layer of ash. But if you count the number of layers between those two event horizons, it is not consistent. There's a 35% difference in the different test holes. So those layers are not annual rings. Next question. What about the Mars rock? Well, this is an interesting story. This article says, are we really Martians? Astronomers say life could have come from Mars. Well, this is just pure propaganda, okay? Here's basically what happened. The Mars lander sampled the Martian soil. Sophisticated tests performed on those samples did not find a trace of a germ, NASA said. When they went there to Mars and tested the soil, nothing was found to indicate life. This rock was found in Antarctica, near the South Pole. It was not found on Mars. They found it on Earth. The rock had some little bitty wiggly lines on there. Here's a picture of one of those little wiggly lines. Some scientists argued, boy, this is proof of life. That's a bacteria. No, it's a wiggly line on a rock. First place, Mars and Earth are a long ways away from each other. As we circle around the sun, the closest they ever get is about 1/2 of an astronomical unit, or about 45 or 50 million miles. That's the closest we get. To put this in an analogy folks can understand, if we shrank Mars and Earth down to and made them into a couple of tomatoes, Earth would be a 4-inch tomato, Mars would be a 2-inch tomato. Mars is half the diameter of the Earth. The closest they get in their orbit is 1/3 of a mile away at that scale. If I told you, I want you to shoot that 2-inch tomato so that a piece of it flies off and lands on the 4-inch tomato, 1/3 of a mile away. But you cannot leave a dent in the 2-inch tomato. It's going to be impossible. If something hit Mars hard enough to blast a rock off all the way to Earth, it ought to leave a dent on Mars. A huge dent. It would take an enormous amount of energy to eject a rock into orbit off of Mars. Even though Mars has less gravity and a less escape velocity than Earth, it still has gravity and has an escape velocity. I don't think you can blast a rock off of Mars. But maybe they did. Here are some problems with this, some things people need to understand. Number one, they claim it came from Mars. There is no proof that it did. Number two, they claim it broke off 16 million years ago, drifted around through space, and finally landed on Earth 13,000 years ago. You don't know any of that. That's hocus pocus stuff. For one thing, if this bacteria is on this rock, the explosion and the drifting through space and the re-entry to Earth's atmosphere would totally remelt this rock and destroy any evidence of this bacteria. So what did this bacteria eat for all that time? How did it survive the impact, the vacuum of space, the entry, the freezing for 13,000 years? It's interesting, NASA funded the research on the rock, and at the same time, NASA grant money was stalled in Congress. Congress was deciding, do we really need to spend all these billions of dollars on NASA? Their money was held up. They had to find something. They already had that rock sitting in a closet for 7 years, I believe. They said, let's get out the Mars rock, and let's claim it came from Mars, and that'll get our grant money. And it worked. News media picked it up, spread this all over the news. Oh, they found life on Mars. Congress said, oh, really? Well, they must be finding something important. Let's give them their money. They released the grant money. Then a couple of weeks later, they announced, oh, well, guess what? We discovered it's not really a bacteria. It's a crystal that forms normally. Oops, we made a mistake. But guess what? They kept the grant money and kept on researching. I'm not against NASA. I'm against using federal funding to try to prove evolution. I'm not against going to the moon or going to Mars. I'm not against any of that stuff. But I think that there may be another ulterior motive here. Maybe the purpose of the space program is to prepare the world for Big Brother, for the New World Order. Maybe that's the real purpose. And I think everybody should be fully informed of what's going on with NASA. I doubt there's life on other planets. First place, there's no proof there is. Okay, so if somebody wants to argue there is, they're arguing from the negative, which is a poor position to be in. Secondly, the Bible says Eve is the mother of all living. I have a hard time getting around that verse. I mean, the Bible says she's the mother of all living. So I don't think there's life on any other planets. Next question. What about theistic evolution? Couldn't God use evolution to get us here? Well, there are all kinds of people who claim to be theistic evolutionists. Okay? We have an entire debate for 5 hours with me against Hugh Ross, and he would not call himself a theistic evolutionist. He says, I do not believe in evolution, but he does believe an awful lot of things like the evolutionists believe, like the earth is billions of years old, and God needed billions of years to get it just right for us to live here. So, the theistic evolutionist, I think, is trying to ride 2 horses at the same time. And they're going in opposite directions, like Don Boys says. His book that we sell is hilarious. I like Don Boys and his attitude. He just blasts them, you know. He's really a character. So, I would say no, theistic evolution is not possible. First of all, what kind of God would need to use evolution? Can't He make it right first time? Well, what do you mean by God? People say, I believe God used evolution. Well, then you got a different God than I do. It's not the clear teaching of the Bible, and I think it would be a retarded God that had to do that, to use evolution to get us here. A Nobel Prize winner, Jacques Monod, in biology, he commented on theistic evolution. He said, "Natural selection is the blindest, most cruel way of evolving new species, and more complex and refined organisms. The struggle for life and elimination of the weakest is a horrible process against which our whole modern ethics revolts. An ideal society is a non-selective society, one where the weak is protected, which is exactly the reverse of the so-called natural law." I am surprised that a Christian would defend the idea that this is the process which God more or less set up in order to have evolution. I agree, Jacques. God would not use that process. The God of the Bible did not use evolution to get us here. God did it right in 6 days, just like the Bible says. One fellow from Northwestern University wrote, "Whatever the God implied by evolutionary theory and the data of natural history may be like, he is not the Protestant God of waste not, want not. He is also not a loving God who cares about his productions. He is not even the awful God portrayed in the book of Job. The God of Galapagos is careless, wasteful, indifferent, almost diabolical. He is certainly not the sort of God to whom anyone would be inclined to pray." Well, I agree with that one too. So those who try to mix evolution with Christianity or mix evolution with God have a different God. Okay? The Bible says, through faith we understand that God framed the worlds. God created it. He did it right in 6 days. Exodus 20 tells us he did it all in 6 days, and he rested the seventh day. And the Bible says his works were finished from the foundation of the world, and he rested on the seventh day. It is not at all using any evolution. In Genesis 2, it says God ended his work on the seventh day, and he rested from all his work which he had made. Romans 5 tells us man brought death into the world. Adam brought death into this world. No, God did not use any evolution to get us here. God made us in his image. So, points to consider about this. Number one, depends what you mean by God, if you think God used evolution. It's certainly not the clear teaching of the Bible, and it's a retarded God that can't make it right first time. My Bible says God's work is perfect. He does it right the first time. And it's not the character of God to use misfits and suffering and death. Charles Darwin said in his book, "Thus from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object we're capable of conceiving, the production of higher animals, directly follows." See, Darwin had a different God. He thought he had to use suffering and death and misfits. That's not correct. Fifthly, theistic evolution nullifies the need for the death of Christ. Why did Christ die on the cross? If death was already here in the world before Adam came, then why did Christ die on the cross? Sixthly, there's no evidence for evolution anyway. So why should we compromise a perfectly good Bible, which has never been proven wrong, with a silly theory like evolution, which has never been proven right? I see no reason for it at all. All right, next question. I get asked this question quite frequently as I travel. They'll say, didn't the Pope accept evolution? Well, 3 different times, popes and down through history have said evolution fits with the Bible teaching. I disagree strongly. I would disagree with the Pope on many doctrines. Many of my friends and neighbors are Catholic, and I'm not going to try to bash Catholics too hard here, but they need to really study what their church teaches, and I think they would get out and go to a different kind of church. Milton Cooper has a book out called Behold a Pale Horse, in which he says, and I've tried to document this, and many people have said, yes, I've heard that it's true, but I can't prove it, so I'll keep working on documentation. But here's what he says in his book. During World War II, a Polish salesman working for IG Farben Chemical Company sold cyanide, Zyklon B, and malathion to the Nazis to help exterminate the Jews at Auschwitz. After the war, he feared for his life, so he joined the Catholic Church and became a priest in 1946. In 1958, he was ordained as Poland's youngest bishop. After 30 days, the reigning pope was assassinated, and he became Pope John Paul II. If you study the history of the Catholic Church and their persecution of Christians down through the last few thousand years, read Fox's Book of Martyrs or other books like that. I think you'll say, wow, I better get out of this. I used to go to the Catholic Church. I never was a member, but I used to go as a kid sometimes in Morton, Illinois. And I'm telling you, there are things they believe that are just simply unscriptural. And so I don't care what the Pope thinks about evolution. He's just plain wrong. He has tried to mix evolution in with Christianity, and it just won't mix. I'm convinced there simply is no compromise in this war. You might want to get the website reachingcatholics.org and get more information on Catholicism if you'd like more on that. It's not my specialty by any means, but John Ankerberg has some good books on that at the John Ankerberg program in Chattanooga, Tennessee on Catholicism. Okay, next question. Why do you use the King James Version of the Bible? Well, that's a fair question. There are many different versions of the Bible that have been written. And again, this is not my field of expertise by any means, but there are lots of good websites where you can get lots of information on this. When I was saved, I was 16 years old. I'd been raised in the Methodist Church, the Mennonite Church, and the Lutheran Church. We were members of those, plus visited just about every other kind there was, the Catholic Church and lots of others. And so at Methodist Church, I had gotten a Revised Standard Version, RSV, in 4th grade for perfect attendance for 1 year. And that was the Bible I began using as a brand new Christian. When I was 16 years old and gave my heart to the Lord, I started reading my RSV. Within a few months, within a few weeks, actually, I started going to a Baptist church in Pekin, Illinois, Bethel Baptist Church. And my pastor said, "Kent, you ought to get a Bible." I said, "I've got a Bible. I've been reading it and making notes in it. I've been reading it like crazy, reading 2 hours a day." He said, "You ought to get a real Bible." Well, I was a little offended at first. I said, "What do you mean? I got a real Bible." He said, "No, you don't." And he explained to me about the different versions. Let me give you just a condensed version of the version story, and maybe you can understand why the King James is the one you ought to use if you speak English. When the Bible was first being written in New Testament times, it would be shortly after the birth of Christ, after the death and resurrection of Christ, people started writing the New Testament books. Now, back in these days, 2,000 years ago, they did not have printing presses. They didn't have Xerox machines. You know, you couldn't go make copies. You had to, if you wanted a copy of something, you had to hand write it. Printing press wasn't invented until about 1500, 400, 500 years ago. So they would handwrite copies. When they wanted to make copies of the Bible, they would unroll the scroll, copy it, sit there all day and make copies, and then at the end of the day, roll the scroll back up. Well, you can only roll and unroll a scroll so many times, and it begins to wear out. And so, sure enough, after a few hundred years, the scroll is worn out, and now you have copies that have been made. And the people that did this are called the scribes, where we get our word inscribe or subscribe. To write is what the root word means, to scribe. So they were the scribes, and their job was to copy this. Now, back then, if they found a mistake in your copy that could not be easily corrected, I mean, they wouldn't buy a copy, especially of the Bible, if there was a mistake in it. It would be thrown away. And it may take you, 3 months to write out a copy of the Bible, and so they had to make sure it was right. And they would check it several different ways. They would count the letters, they would read it backwards, and all sorts of ways to check the Bible. And bottom line is, they were extremely accurate in their copying procedure. The copies would be certified as correct, and then they would go into circulation as legitimate certified Bibles. A few hundred years after the birth of Christ, there was a group of folks that went down to Egypt to start a cult, sort of like Jehovah's Witnesses today. They wanted everybody to think they were Christians, and they wanted to claim to be Christians, but they did not believe most of the major doctrines of Christianity. They didn't believe in the deity of Christ, for instance. And so these folks down in Egypt, which at that time Alexandria was a major city, and they became known as the Alexandrians. They made their own translation of the Bible, changing all sorts of things, leaving out verses they didn't like. Now, if you're going to make a counterfeit $20 bill, you don't put Mickey Mouse's picture on it. Okay, you try to make it as close as possible to the original. So their counterfeit copy that they made, came to be known as the Alexandrian manuscript, had a lot of gospel in it. You could still get saved reading it, I'm sure. But in many cases, when it says Lord Jesus Christ, they would just say Jesus, because they wanted to minimize or diminish the idea that Jesus is Lord. So they would leave some of that stuff out. Well, this Alexandrian copy of the Bible spread for a few years while their cult lasted, and they kind of died out. And several copies were made of the Alexandrian manuscripts. Meanwhile, the received text, the real one, is being copied over and over and over. And time is passing along, and the originals keep getting worn out every few hundred years. But by then, you've got scores and scores or hundreds of copies. These copies are spreading out around the world. This body of manuscripts came to be known as the Textus Receptus, which means the received text. But you get to the year about 1500, or 13 or 1400, back about here, people started trying to put the Bible into English. So they gathered up these copies of Scripture from many different places and found out there were no differences between them, except for spelling changes. Cities, and sometimes, Peter is changed to Pedro or something like that. Spellings of names is the primary difference they found in these different copies, proving they had been copied correctly and preserved for over 1,000 years. As they spread out around the world and had no contact with each other, they're still doing it right. They gathered together over 5,000 of these manuscripts, known as the Textus Receptus. And they translated the Bible into English. First you had, I think, the Tyndale Bible and the Wycliffe Bible. I don't remember the order, but finally you get 1611, they get the King James Version of the Bible. Well, everybody's happy. The Bible's in English, and this was really at the height of the English language. This is the time of Shakespeare. Today, kids have a very limited vocabulary. Oh, that's cool, man. Everything is cool. They got one word to describe everything. Back then, they were much more verbose. They used lots of different adjectives, and English language was much more at its zenith, I guess, back 400 years ago than it is today. So this was probably the time when God chose to get the Bible into English during the Shakespearean era. Then, about 1800, 200 years ago, somebody brought in these Alexandrian manuscripts and said, wow, these are older. And they were. Therefore, they're better. Ooh, and right there's where the mistake is. See, nobody was using these old manuscripts because they were frauds. Like a Jehovah's Witness Bible. They're just sitting on the shelf. Nobody's going to use this thing and wear it out. And meanwhile, the originals are getting worn out. So when they did the King James, about the oldest version they had was maybe 800 years old. The oldest surviving manuscript. And they translated it into English. Along comes the Dead Sea Scrolls here recently, and they discovered it matches perfectly the Textus Receptus. It does not match the Alexandrian. So, in the early 1800s, when many people were criticizing the Bible anyway, for all sorts of reasons, political reasons primarily, some guys came along and said, wow, we've got this Alexandrian manuscript. It's the oldest. Must be the best. And you get guys like Westcott and Hort who get involved, who wanted to pervert God's Word in many ways. And they made their own translation, the Westcott and Hort version. And from that, most of the newer translations have come. NIV, New American Standard, all of the Bibles, most of the Bible, the newer versions of the Bible, are good translations of the Alexandrian manuscript. So the people that did it are smart people. They're probably well-intentioned, I would assume that. But they're translating the wrong manuscript. It's like somebody doing a good translation of Playboy magazine into French. Well, yeah, they might do a good translation, but they're translating a bad text. And so that's what you get with the most of the newer versions of the Bible are, like I said, good translations of a lousy manuscript. If you want to call our office, we've got little pamphlets we'll have them up on our website here, where you can get pamphlets showing the versions and the comparison of the different versions. You might want to get information from avpublications.com, authorized version, avpublications.com. They've got tremendous information on the different versions of the Bible. Okay, next question. Are there contradictions in the Bible? Well, I get this one a lot. Doesn't the Bible have contradictions in it? As a brand new Christian, I had just finished going to the Methodist Church for years, and I got saved, started going to a little Baptist church, independent, temperamental, right-wing, radical Baptist church in Pekin, Illinois. My mom and dad got kind of concerned that I was making a lot of changes in my life, and they liked all the changes, but they thought maybe I'm going a little overboard in this fundamentalist religion. So they said, let's send you to the Methodist church camp. Maybe they can calm you down a little bit. So I showed up at the Methodist church camp, brand new Christian, been saved a couple of months. And the counselor set us boys down in the cabin. He said, well, boys, we're going to be here all week, and let's introduce ourselves. So we all told him our names. And he said, well, my name is, I forget what it was now, but he said, I'm a senior at the University of Illinois, and I want you to know I'm a humanist. Well, I did not know what a humanist was at that time. So I said, well, does that mean you believe in humans? He said, well, yeah, I believe in humans, but that's not what that means. I said, well, do you believe the Bible? And he said, no. He said, the Bible's a good book, has a lot of truth in it, but the Bible has got mistakes in it also. I'd only been saved a couple of months, but I had been taught by my preacher, if somebody tells you the Bible has errors, hand them your Bible and say, show me one. So I handed him my Bible and said, show me one. He said, oh, I'd be glad to. We sat there on the bunks, all the guys gathered around, and he said, well, let's look at Genesis chapter 1 and see what the Bible says here. And I'm going to show you some contradictions in the Bible. In Genesis chapter 1, verse number 12, the Bible says, the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, And all this happened on the third day. So the counselor said, Kent, tell me, what day did God make the trees? I said, day 3. He said, that's right. Now, look at verse 20. Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth. He said, Kent, what day did God make the birds on? I said, day 5. He said, what did he make them out of? You know, he made Adam out of the dust. He made Eve out of a rib. What did he make the birds out of? I said, water. He said, that's right. Very good. Now look at verse 24. This is day 6. God said, let the earth bring forth a living creature after his kind, and the cattle and all this stuff. And then in verse 26, God said, let us make man in our image. He said, okay, Kent, tell me, who was made first, animals or man? I said, the animals. He said, what day did this happen on? I said, day 6. He said, very good. Now let's turn to chapter 2, and I'll show you some contradictions. Chapter 2, verse number 7. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. And out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree. He said, hold it, Kent, don't you see a contradiction here? Chapter 1 has the trees made first. Chapter 2 has the trees made after man. Well, I was just shocked. I'd never seen that before. Then he showed me verse 18. And the Lord God said, it is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him an help meet for him. And out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air. He said, Kent, we have an obvious contradiction here. Actually, several contradictions. First, we have the birds being made out of the ground, whereas in chapter 1 they're made out of the water. Secondly, we have the birds made after man, whereas chapter 1 has them made before man. He said the Bible's a good book, but it has contradictions in it. Basically, this chart shows the supposed contradictions. Chapter 1 has grass, plants, trees made on day 3. Chapter 2 has trees made after man on day 6. Chapter 1 has birds made out of the water on day 5. Chapter 2 has birds made out of the ground on day 6. Chapter 1 has animals made before man. Chapter 2 has animals made after man. And so the counselor said, look, Kent, I'm glad you like the Bible, but the Bible has mistakes in it. I was a brand new Christian, and I was devastated. I do debates at universities all the time now. Can't wait for my next one. But the professors will often say, well, the Bible's a good book, but it has contradictions. And they almost always bring this one out right here. Let me tell you the story. Here's what happened. There are no contradictions in God's Word. In chapter 1, it tells us the story of how God did things. Chapter 2 is only telling us what happened on day 6. Now watch this carefully. On day 3, God made the plants. On day 5, he made the birds out of the water. On day 6, he made animals. Then he made man. Then he made the garden. Now, the rest of the story in chapter 2 is talking about what happened in the garden. For instance, God made trees that were good for food and pleasant to the sight. He's only talking about what happened in the garden. The rest of the world's already full of trees from day 3. Then, he made one more of each animal so that Adam could name them and select a wife. See, if God had made Adam last, and Adam never saw God make anything, Satan can walk in and say, hey, Adam, how do you like my garden I made? How would Adam know? Adam actually witnessed God making some things. Now, the last thing God made was Eve, and guess who Satan came to trick? Eve. She had not seen God make a thing. So there are no contradictions. This is a continuation of the story. God made one more of each animal. Up out of the ground came an elephant. Adam said, elephant. No thanks. I don't want to marry that one. Up out of the ground came a giraffe. He said, giraffe. No thanks. And one by one, God made one more of each animal. Adam named them and then rejected them as far as a wife goes. So then the Lord said, okay, Adam, just go to sleep, son. I got a surprise for you when you wake up. And he was while he's sleeping, he took out one rib and made the world's first loudspeaker. Made woman. And since then, nobody's rested. So the story goes, they say. Anyway, no, there are no contradictions. Another one. As a young Christian, I was reading through God's Word myself, and I came across 2 Chronicles chapter 4. The Bible says Solomon made a molten sea, a big brass bowl, 10 cubits from brim to brim, round in compass, and 5 cubits the height thereof, and a line of 30 cubits did compass it about. I read that verse and I thought, wait a minute, this is a mistake, a mathematical goof. Because if you're going to find the circumference to a circle, you take pi, 3.14159, times the diameter, and they said the diameter was 10, so the circumference should have been 31.4 cubits. Why does the Bible say it was 30 cubits around? I thought it was a mistake, and I was discouraged and going to quit believing the Bible. But I read the story a bunch of times because it just bothered me. I came across verse 5, and it said the thickness of it was in hand breadth. That's a lot of brass, by the way, pretty thick. And it was like the brim of a cup with flowers and lilies. So I got to thinking, I wonder if it was 10 cubits outside to outside. That's the number you would need to get the thing through a doorway. But it was 30 cubits around the inside, because that's the circumference of the area that carries the liquid. So I did a survey of people. I said, can I measure your cubit, please? And they put their elbow on the table. I'd measure their cubit and measure their hand breadth. I found out if you figure it out and you subtract 2 hand breadths from 10 cubits and figure backwards, you'll get a value of pi, 3.14, as far as you want to carry it. So God's Word is correct after all. Another supposed contradiction that comes up often is people will say, well, how many chariot horses did Solomon have anyway? If you look at 1 Kings chapter 4, it says Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. Okay? 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots. But when you read the very same story in 2 Chronicles chapter 9, it says Solomon had 4,000 stalls for horses and chariots, and 12,000 horsemen. Men, of course, those who don't believe the Bible gleefully point out, see, there's a contradiction here. Some people, even like Henry Morris, my good friend and one of my heroes in the faith, who wrote the Defender's Bible, which we sell and highly recommend, he has a footnote right here that says this is a copyist error. And they go through a big, long explanation of how easy it is to make 4 into 40 in the Hebrew language by putting a little dot up above or something like that. And they'll say, well, the scribe must have just missed it. Well, these guys know their language. They know the difference between 4 and 40. It is a major difference. No, there is not a contradiction here. Let's read it very carefully and see what God's Word actually says. In 1 Kings, it tells us Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots. Does that verse tell me how many chariots he had? No. It tells me how many horses he had for his chariots, right? Now, this one says Solomon had 4,000 stalls for horses and chariots. Now we know how many chariots he had. They had 10 horses per chariot. So if he had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots, he would need 4,000 chariots. 10 horses per chariot. You can see the same thing in 2 Samuel chapter 10. The Syrians fled before Israel, and David slew the men of 700 chariots. Does that tell me how many men he slew? No. He slew the men of 700 chariots. When you read the same story in 1 Chronicles chapter 19, verse 18, it says, David slew of the Syrians 7,000 men which fought in chariots. And again, people will say, well, this is a copyist error in the King James. No, it's not a copyist error. It was fine, just like it's written. They had 10 men and 10 horses per chariot, because the chariot was the tank of the day, and you carry spare men and spare horses in case you get a flat tire in battle. You can swap horses or swap soldiers out. So no, there's not a copyist error. Many new versions, though, have tried to correct God's Word only to make it wrong. If you look at the NIV, what they did with this, they say Solomon had 4,000 stalls for chariot horses and 12,000 horses. Now, wait a minute. He had 12,000 horsemen, not 12,000 horses. And you read the NIV down in 2 Chronicles 9, it says Solomon had 4,000 stalls for horses and chariots. They totally messed it up. That wouldn't work. You have to have 10 horses per chariot. You can't have 1 horse per chariot, not if you're going to go into battle, because 1 arrow takes out your whole chariot. You had 10 horses and 10 men per chariot. In the New American Standard, they got it right. Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots, and down in 2 Chronicles, Solomon had 4,000 stalls for horses and chariots. Yay, we got this version, got it right. But if you look at the New Revised Standard Version, they got it wrong. They say Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots. And down in the 2 Chronicles chapter 9, Solomon had 4,000 stalls, 4 horses, and chariots, and 12,000 horses. Whereas in 1 Kings it has 12,000 horsemen. They blew it. Here they are trying to fix God's word, and it didn't need fixed. Okay, it was fine like it was. When you look at the NIV, they got it wrong. David killed 700 of their charioteers and 40,000 of their foot soldiers in 2 Samuel. You look down to 1 Chronicles, it says David killed 7,000 of their charioteers. Now, this is an obvious contradiction. I think you'd find in a lot of the newer versions it's easy to find many contradictions. But if you stick with the King James, I don't think you'll be able to find one that you can prove is a real contradiction in the Bible. When you look at the Revised Standard Version, they got it right. 700 chariot teams and 40,000 horsemen. And then they said David killed 7,000 Armenian charioteers, which would be 10 men per chariot. But they got it wrong in the last part. 40,000 foot soldiers. 2 Samuel said 40,000 horsemen. They messed it up. They got part of it right and part of it wrong. They messed it up. They should have just left it alone. We've got a book that we sell at our ministry called Errors in the King James Bible by Peter Ruckman, who lives here in Pensacola. And though he's a little rude and crude and harsh on folks, in his mannerisms, I think his teaching is right on this topic. Okay, he's got it right. There are no contradictions in God's Word. Some people have said, well, the Bible has a contradiction because it says the rabbit chews the cud and rabbits don't chew the cud. Well, yes, they do. Okay, you need to read the Creation Magazine article, September 98, on page 56. The rabbits do eat their food, swallow it, digest it partly, goes through, comes back out. They pick it up and eat it again. So they are re-chewing that which was chewed before. Yes, they do chew the cud. One scoffer said, well, there's a contradiction in the Bible because it says in Genesis chapter 10, the earth was divided up by languages, and when you get to chapter 11, it says the whole earth was of one language. Well, duh. This is going back and recapping the story. Okay? Newspapers do this all the time. The headline says, 10,000 people killed in earthquake in Armenia. Then you read in the newspaper, done in the story, it says, people were going about their daily duties, headed for breakfast. Wait a minute, I thought the title said 10,000 were killed. They're going to retell the story with more details. So this is not a contradiction. This is normally the way everybody writes a book. Okay? A flashback, so it's not a problem at all. Numbers chapter 25 says, and those that died in the plague were 20 and 4,000. When you read this same story in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 10, it tells us, neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in one day 23,000. And the scoffers will say, see the contradiction here? Numbers says 24,000 died. 1 Corinthians says 23,000 died. Anybody have an answer to this one? Is there a contradiction here? No, there's no contradiction. Look at it. 24,000 died in the plague, right? 1 Corinthians tells us 23,000 died in one day. So guess what? 1,000 died the next day. It's not a contradiction at all. God's Word was right, just like it says. Next question. How did they have days before the sun was created on day 4? Well, that's a good question. I get asked this a lot. People like Hugh Ross will say, see, this is proof that the sun was already there for millions of years. Well, you need to get our long debate series we have with Hugh Ross, a whole package of tapes for $78. You can get that. But here's the story. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, God said, let there be light. Now, in English, we have one word, light, that really means two different things. I would say, would you please turn on the light? But what does the light produce? Produces light. We've got one word that means two things. It means the source of the light, and it means the light itself. The Hebrew language has two words. They have the Hebrew word or, which means the light. Then they have the Hebrew word meor, which means the light source. So here God is creating the light on Genesis 1, verse 3 and 4, to divide the light from the darkness. When you get to verse 5, God called the light, that's just the light itself, not the light source, He called it day. That's or, Hebrew word or. When you come to verse 14, God said, let there be lights. This is the Hebrew word meor, which means the light giver. So now, God is making the light giver, whereas before He made the light. See, God Himself is light. When you look at Genesis 1:15, God said, let them be for lights, meor, light givers, in the firmament to give light upon the earth. And it was so. He made the greater light, the meor, to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night, made the stars also. Psalm 27 says, the Lord is my light. That's the or. That's not meor. He's not just a source of light. He is light itself. Very interesting distinction here. When you look at 1 John chapter 1, the Bible says God is light. Now, of course, we're in the Greek language. Phos for radiance, like we got a word phosphorescent, or things that have the word phos in it, a Photoshop. You know, photo means light, all right, from Greek. So God made the stars, according to Psalms chapter 8, and verse number 3. And when you consider the stars, you'll say, wow, God had to make all this stuff. It's just incredible. When you look at Job 38, it says, the morning stars sang together. Carl Baugh's got a great book called Panorama of Creation, where he talks about this, how that the original creation, probably the stars, were producing their frequencies like they still are, but the canopy of ice above could translate that into sound, and people could hear the stars. Like living inside of a giant stereo. I don't know if it's true or not, but it sure preaches good, and it sounds like something God would do to make that system back then for them to live. I think God made the light later in the week, the fourth day. The sun, that is. God made the sun later, so that people wouldn't worship it. He wanted His children to know, look, yes, you need the sun. It's a handy thing to have. You need a lot of things. However, it's not God. I'm God. This is what God would be saying. So the sun was made so Adam and Eve would not worship the sun. He didn't make that first. And the sun did not create the world. Okay, the sun just supplies the heat we need and several other things for us to live here. All right, another concept. Next question. I was visiting a friend of mine one time in Mobile, Alabama, and he said, Brother Hovind, let's go to McDonald's. I want to show you something. We went out to get ice cream or something, and we're sitting there at the table. He took out two pieces of paper and wrote on one Mr. Flat, and on the other one he wrote Mrs. Flat. He laid them on the table at McDonald's. I said, okay, Ron, what is this? He said, well, I want to explain to you why we can't understand God. I said, well, I want to hear this, that's for sure. He said, suppose Mr. Flat and Mrs. Flat live in flatland. They're two-dimensional people. I taught geometry, so I said, I understand that. He said, okay, when Mr. Flat sees Mrs. Flat, all he sees is a straight line. He can only see one dimension. Now, he could walk around or slide around Mrs. Flat and figure out she's really a rectangle. He sees one dimension. He perceives or understands two dimensions. Now, you and I see two dimensions. We see the height and the width. We perceive the depth. You don't really see depth, you understand depth. That's why it's called depth perception. You can take a picture of what you're looking at, or if you're watching this on videotape, you're seeing a flat screen. But I'm telling you, I'm a three-dimensional person appearing on a two-dimensional surface, on a picture. So you understand depth, you don't really see depth. I said, okay, Ron, I got you. He said, okay, here we have Mr. Flat and Mrs. Flat. They live in flatland. They are two-dimensional people. They have no concept of the third dimension, no concept of height. I said, okay. So he puts his finger on the table over here. He said, let's suppose I stick my finger through the table, through their flatland. Mrs. Flat comes over, looks at the cross-section of my finger, which would be a circle, and she says, wow, I've seen Kent Hovind. He's a circle. Oh. Over here, I stick three fingers through the table. Mr. Flat comes over, and he sees three circles. So he goes back to Mrs. Flat and says, well, guess what? Mr. Hovind is three circles. She says, no, honey, he's one circle. I've seen him. Now, they're probably going to split the church and start the church of the three circles and the church of the one circles, but neither one understands me. It's not possible to put a three-dimensional person into two dimensions where they can comprehend it. You just can't understand that. Now turn to Ephesians chapter 3, where it says that we may be able to comprehend with all saints what is the length and depth and breadth and height, and to understand the love of Christ, which passeth knowledge. Several amazing things about this verse. There are four dimensions mentioned here. Secondly, how can you understand something that passes knowledge? Well, ask any Christian that loves the Lord. They'll tell you, I understand it, and it passes knowledge. Okay. You don't know. I've never seen God, but I understand. Wow, what a mighty God we serve. So apparently God has more dimensions than we have. The advantage to this is, of course, Mr. Flat and Mrs. Flat can be in Flatland. I can put my hand right on top of them. I can actually be closer to them than they could ever get to each other. And yet they are totally unaware of my presence because I'm in a different dimension. And God can be in us and around us and under us and over us, and He can be through us, and we don't even see Him. He's in a different dimension. I thought that might help about Mr. Flat and Mrs. Flat. Next question. What about the races? Why do we have different races of people? Well, anybody with two eyes can look around and see there are different colors of people in the world. No question about that. However, I don't think we should use the word races. There really aren't any races. There's one race. It's called the human race. There are different skin colors, but there's only one race. Would you say these are different races of cows? No, they're just different colors of cows, right? They're still a cow. So I think we've made a mistake by making too much distinction on different races, and that's kind of a poor term to use. There are 4 different theories of why we have different skin colors. And I'll probably use the word races, but I mean skin colors here. One theory says Adam and Eve were medium brown, and they produced all the different colors in their own family. God likes variety, so that may be where it comes from. The problem with this theory is it creates a problem when you get down to Noah's flood. Because at the flood, you're back down to one family. Unless Noah's kids married people of these other colors, which, by the way, is perfectly fine scripturally. I think it may be, social problems for years if you do that, but there's no scripture against marrying a different color person at all. Here's a black family that had 3 albino children. Kind of interesting, okay? That stuff happens from time to time. The second theory says, according to Genesis 4, the Lord put a mark upon Cain. And some have argued that this mark means Cain became a black man. Of course, the Bible doesn't say that. The Bible says God put a mark on him. Now, black people think Cain became white, and that was the curse. I don't think either are correct, because this, of course, was way back here at the creation. It would not explain why we have 3 or 4 basic colors of people. This would only mean 2. And that would mean one nation has got something wrong with them, one skin color. I don't believe that at all. Okay, the third theory says Noah put a curse on Canaan. If you know the story in Genesis chapter 9, Noah woke from his wine and said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brethren." Several times it refers to him as a servant. And some have argued this justifies making black people into servants because God made them to be servants. Well, now you better go back and read that passage. It does not say Canaan became black. It says Canaan will be a servant. That's it. Anything else you draw from that is a conclusion that you have made, not what the Scripture says. The fourth theory. By the way, I don't buy the third theory either. The fourth theory says the Tower of Babel is what caused this to happen. When God commanded the people to spread out after the flood, they rebelled. Nimrod said, "Let's build a tower in spite of God's commands. We're going to rebel against God." And so you come to chapter 10 and you read the whole story about the Tower of Babel. And it says, "By these were the islands of the Gentiles divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their family, in their nations." So chapter 10 and 11 is telling us a story of the origin of the different nations in the world. Notice it says this is the origin of their tongue, languages, and families and nations. Not just the tongues were divided. Probably after the flood, the Tower of Babel took place. God broke them up into different language groups. They spread out. Those that spoke French went one way. Those that spoke German went a different way. Those that spoke Spanish went a different way. And they began having to marry back to their own family. Now, after the flood, they no longer had the canopy of water to protect them. So more radiation coming in would mean more mutations. And close marrying within the family causes problems. The Habsburgs, for years, had to marry royalty. And pretty soon the Habsburgs started looking pretty strange. Today we call them a redneck. Just marrying too close to the bloodline for too long. Okay, you marry first cousins for a while and it starts to look kind of strange. And unusual things happen. Charles Darwin married his first cousin because he wanted to raise a race of purebreds. Well, it didn't work. Okay, most of his kids turned out dying or deformed, something wrong with them. Okay, demented. It doesn't work. It maybe in the original creation it wasn't a problem, but today there's such a genetic load, it's genetic suicide to do that. Almost all states have laws against marrying anybody closer than a first cousin. I think 3 states allow first cousin marriages. No other states do. So Genesis chapter 10 says, "By these were the nations divided, in the earth after their flood. So not only was the languages divided, the nations were divided. Bill Cooper has a great book on this that you can get from our ministry called After the Flood. It shows the dispersion of the sons of Noah after the flood was over. Genesis 10, it's a little hard to count the names, but if you go through and try to figure it out, it appears like Japheth had about 14 kids and grandkids. Ham had 31. One of those is Canaan. So if the curse was on Canaan, it wouldn't work to say Canaan became black, because all of the Hamites lived in Africa, according to the Bible. You read Psalm 105, and it says, Israel came to Egypt, and Jacob journeyed in the land of Ham, and did wonders in the land of Ham. Just about all Bible scholars agree, Egypt and Africa is where the Hamites settled. So all of Ham's descendants were black, or dark-skinned. The Japhethites, the sons of Japheth, became the Europeans. The Shemites, children of Shem, became the Orientals. There aren't too many folks who would argue with this, that that's where the three original nationality groups or racial characteristics, colors of skin, came from the sons of Noah, which probably broke up after the flood. Shem had about 29 kids and grandkids. So it looks like about 75 original in the first few generations. I would say probably God, when he broke them up into languages, there were 75 original languages. And even today, English, German, and Danish can easily be traced to a common root language. Many words are still the same. Old English is extremely difficult to read. Here's some English from Beowulf from only 1,500 years ago, and very few folks today can read any of it. English language changes a lot. Matter of fact, if it weren't for the rapid communication we have in the world, English language today would break up into many dialects that couldn't even understand each other. When I was in Australia, I'm at the restaurant with the pastor and his family, and I said to the waitress, I said, ma'am, would you bring me a napkin? The preacher bumped me. He said, don't say that. I said, what? He said, don't ask for a napkin down here. I said, why? What is it? He said, it's a diaper. I said, oh, what do I want? He said, you want a serviette? I said, okay. Ma'am, could I have a serviette? English language, get somebody from Maine to talk to somebody from Alabama. They can hardly understand each other, okay? And they're both speaking English. Get somebody from Brooklyn, where the Poity Popa Boyd is poiched on the Coib on Toity Toyd Street. You just can't understand hardly anything they're saying, but they are speaking English. And if it weren't for the fact that we could talk to each other once in a while, within a few generations you couldn't understand hardly anything they were saying. So the languages broke up, but today rapid communication makes it less likely to happen. Spanish, Italian, French, and Latin probably had a common root language. Today they're broken up. Most people that speak Spanish can understand quite a bit of Italian. And French even. There's probably had a common root. My Bible says God made of one blood all nations of men. So we all came from one family. There's no reason to be a racist. Malachi says, have you not all one Father? Why do we deal treacherously, every man against his brother? Here they are searching for the search for Adam and Eve in Newsweek magazine. They've discovered that we all came from one woman. Well, I could have told them that. I even know her name. And her husband's name and a couple of her kids' names, okay? So yes, they're finally finding out God's Word is correct. Ken Ham has a great book on this topic called One Blood. If you want more on that, you can get that through our ministry. Just give us a call. Next question. What about cloning? Well, the DNA molecule found in the nucleus of every cell is incredibly complicated. Okay, it's the most complex molecule in the universe. What they did for cloning is they took the DNA out of one cell and put it into a different cell, which is really an amazing genetic trick, but that's all it is. They didn't create the DNA, that's for sure. It would be like figuring out a different way to get the information off your hard drive. Well, you're not making the information, you're just taking the information off the hard drive of your computer. They didn't create a thing. So they cloned this sheep, Dolly, by taking DNA code out and putting it into a different cell, which, like I said, was an amazing trick. But the DNA code is so complex, one person's DNA, if you typed it out, would fill enough books to fill Grand Canyon 40 times. Incredibly complicated. Dolly was cloned at a cost of $50,000 after 277 failures. That's an expensive sheep. I said, man, the sheep can do it lots quicker and cheaper. Just leave them alone. They've been doing fine for generations. Dolly was made from a nucleus, was transplanted into a fertilized egg and placed into a surrogate sheep. The nucleus came from a 4-year-old sheep. And Dolly is aging much faster than normal. I think it is interesting that they're able to clone things, but I don't think it's going to accomplish, longevity, because the DNA seems to unravel at the end like split ends on a hair. And if you use a 4-year-old DNA, you're going to shorten the life of the one you make by 4 years probably, or something like that. So I don't think that cloning is anything Christians need to worry about. The Bible says animals always bring forth after their kind. And there's never been an exception to that. Dogs produce dogs, elephants produce elephants, and cats produce cats. Okay, next question. Why did God make poisonous snakes in a perfect world? Good question. Well, this booklet given to missionaries tells them, Dr. Guardian of West Ecuador has treated over 300 cases of snake bite. The pain is gone in 15 minutes if shock is applied within 30 minutes. What is this talking about? They're encouraging people to go into the jungle to carry a stun gun or a little bitty cattle prod, something that provides a high voltage spark. You put a couple batteries in there, it's got 2 electrodes, zap, shocks them. I've heard it said by many folks who've studied this that if you get bit by a snake in your arm, get a high voltage spark, like a lawnmower engine, spark plug, pull the coil wire off your car, chainsaw, whatever's handy, hold it next to the injury site and try to crank it up, which will shock it, provide a high voltage spark. What happens is the poison that the snake injects is a tangled up glob of protein. But be it hemotoxic or neurotoxic, the body can't recognize it, can't do anything with it. But the electric spark straightens it out into a normal protein molecule, and the body digests it. It's actually nutritious. There's a lady here in Pensacola that goes to Calvary Baptist Church on whatever the street is, I forgot now, but she said, I believe that's the one that told me, she said she was bitten, or no, she damaged her neck, and she goes in every month for cobra venom shots. They inject cobra venom into her neck to help it heal. So she's talking to me about it for quite a while. I forget exactly where she's at now. I meet so many folks, but cobra venom to help healing process. It could be that God made these snakes with this, today is poisonous, but in the pre-flood world with stronger electromagnetic field, it would not be poisonous. Dr. Baugh has raised poisonous snakes in his hyperbaric chamber. After a few weeks, they're not poisonous. You can call him for more information on that if you'd like. Next question. What about the Ark of the Covenant? Well, the Bible says in Jeremiah, they took away the spoons, the cups, the candlesticks, the basins, the bowls. I mean, it names just about everything that they took away. Nebuchadnezzar brought them forth out of Jerusalem. When you read the book of Ezra, you see the stuff they brought back out of captivity. And it mentions the knives, the gold basins of gold, the silver basins, all sorts of vessels are mentioned. In neither case does it mention the Ark of the Covenant. Here's the most valuable piece of furniture they have. And it's not mentioned. It's not mentioned as leaving Jerusalem, and it's not mentioned as coming back. Apparently, it never left. Uzziah was the last guy to touch it. Or no, Uzzah was the last guy to touch it, and he died, touching it, at least not being properly prepared. But when you read about Uzziah in 2 Chronicles, it says Uzziah had prepared engines to cast great stones. Apparently, he made catapults that could fling these huge rocks to defend the city of Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar came and built a wall outside the wall of Jerusalem, and he built it outside range of these slings or catapults that would sling these giant stones. Nebuchadnezzar had built a siege wall. He didn't want to get too close because these big stones would come flying out and, kill his men. So Jerusalem for a while had 2 walls around it, the city wall and the siege wall, and no man's land in between. Ron Wyatt died a couple years ago, but he was a good friend of mine. He says he found the Ark of the Covenant, and I can't document this. You can call Richard Reeves, his assistant who took over for him. I think it's a very interesting study. He says Jeremiah took the Ark of the Covenant because God told Jeremiah, you're going to lose, you better surrender. Jeremiah told the king, hey, let's go surrender. The king said, no, we're going to fight it out, and sure enough, they got slaughtered. But Jeremiah apparently took the Ark out and hid it in a cave right under where Jesus later ended up being crucified. Don't know. Fascinating story. Preaches good. But they say the Ark of the Covenant is still there. They're ready to put it in the temple as soon as the temple is built, coming up very soon, which means the Lord's coming must be very soon. And they've already got the temple. They've already got the high priest garments. They've got everything ready to go to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. It's interesting. The Hebrew letter that is often used as a one-letter designation for the word God is called the Shin, S-C-H-I-N. This is sort of like a letter W. The Bible says God will put His name upon the children of Israel in Numbers chapter 6. In 1 Kings chapter 9, it says, talking about the house where God will put His name there forever. In Jerusalem, God says, I will put my name. In 2 Kings chapter 21. Verse 7, it says, in Jerusalem will I put my name forever. 2 Chronicles 33 says, in Jerusalem will I put my name forever. If you look at a map of the city of Jerusalem, there are 3 valleys that make the exact same Hebrew letter, the Shin. His name is there forever, right there in the valleys. I thought that was kind of cute. Okay, next question. What about Bigfoot? I have personally interviewed 8 people who have seen one. I've never seen one. I've read lots of stories about it. I don't know, but since I got asked the question so much, I said, okay, I'll just try to answer it the best I can. I've seen the Patterson film many times, watched it, looked at it, said, oh, it looks awful realistic. Todd Jurassic is a friend of mine. He does a lot of research on Bigfoot. William Gibbons from Canada, that wrote the book with me, Claws, Jaws, and Dinosaurs. He has interviewed folks who have seen them. One guy in Oklahoma shot one. He's got some amazing stories he can tell you of Bigfoot that have been seen in Oklahoma near the Arkansas border. You can just talk to these guys and decide for yourself. I don't know what they are. I can't figure it out. Here's the theories that I've heard of. One theory says this is a unidentified species of ape. They're big, they're hairy, they stink, and nobody's ever captured one yet. Okay, that's one theory. Another theory says it's some of the hippies from the 60s that haven't come in yet. Okay, they're still out there smoking their dope. Could be, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I know this. The Bible says, preach the gospel to every creature. I think I'd have a hard time with that verse if one of those 7 or 8 foot tall creatures came after me. But apparently they don't go after people, tell people to try to shoot them or something. But you can talk to some of the experts on that. Next question. Who were the Nephilim mentioned in Numbers chapter 6? The Bible says, it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Let me say, first of all, from this verse, there have been some false doctrines taught. Some people have said, see, God here promised that nobody would live past 120. That is not what it says. Because there have been people in this century that have lived past 120. There have been people who lived 130, 136, I think, is the record of somebody living right now. So, this is not what this verse is talking about. Most people say, this is probably the warning that God says, you've got 120 years to get the boat built, and I'm going to destroy the world. That's where we get the number 120 for the ark being built. Now, that doesn't say that either, but that is just the commonly accepted theory, and I suspect that's probably correct. So the next verse says, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. When the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Some people have tried to put the first and second half of this verse together and say, see, the giants are the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. It's not what the Bible says. I think the phrase after that might be a separating point, and there may be no connection at all. Maybe the giants in the earth means there were people normally 10 feet tall and giant dinosaurs roaming around, and it was just normal. And then these sons of God and daughters of men thing is totally separate, unrelated to the giants. There are many theories about this, and the best one seems to be, and again, I'm not dogmatic on this because the Bible is not clear, it seems to be that these are fallen angels that married women on earth and produced children that were unusual. They were all destroyed in the flood shortly after this. Some people have argued that these Nephilim are going to return as half demon, half man. Chuck Missler has a great book, The Return of the Nephilim. If you want to read that one, see what his opinion is. He's up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Koinonia House is the website. I'll put a website up on the screen for that. But Bible says in verse 5, God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and the imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So God decided to destroy the world, and some have argued that these Nephilim were messing with genetic engineering back then before the flood. I don't know. I'll have to leave that one for somebody smarter than me to figure out. Next question. What about the Bible codes? Well, again, Chuck Missler has a good book on that, 1-800-K-House-1, called Cosmic Codes, Hidden Messages from the Edge of Eternity. I have read some on this topic. I don't know the answer. It appears to be there is something to the Bible codes. I think it would be impossible to predict the future from these, but you certainly can see that God knew the future, because you can look backwards and see, wow, it was written right here in the codes. There's a good movie out that somebody gave me called, about the Bible codes, what's the name of it? Omega Codes, but there's another one. Yeah, Omega Code, that's the one I saw on DVD somebody gave me. I read the book by Grant Jeffries, the chapter about the signature of God, about the Bible codes. It's very fascinating. For instance, if you look, what this is called is equidistant sequencing of letters. Okay? They took the Hebrew language and put it into the computer, just continuous string of letters. No spaces, no punctuation at all, just a continuous string of letters. And they found out there are codes. Every so often you find a word in here, like a crossword puzzle. Every 13 letters gave the phrase, in the bitter sea of Auschwitz, in Hebrew, the equivalent to that. Every 22 letters gave the phrase, Hitler. All this from Deuteronomy chapter 10. Other phrases found were, king of the Nazis. Another phrase found in there was, a people cry murder and slaughter. All this found in Deuteronomy 10. All through the Bible, they're finding thousands of very interesting codes encoded into the Scripture that would have been impossible for all the computers in the world today to produce something like that. I don't have an answer. I just think it's a very interesting study, and I would encourage you to check it out for yourself. Next question. What about UFOs? Well, UFOs are without a doubt unidentified flying objects. They haven't been identified yet, or else they would be called IFOs, identified flying objects. I have read lots on the topic. I don't know what to think about this one either, but I get asked the question all the time, so I'll tell you my opinion. The ancient stones, the Ica stones, are found showing people looking at something through a telescope, either a comet or a UFO, which indicates 2,000 years ago they had knowledge of telescopes and knowledge of something in space. They were not primitive people back then when the Ica stones were made. I've read lots of articles about it. I like this picture, the alien taking his sunglasses off. But the two best books I've seen from a Christian perspective are this one, UFO End Time Delusion, and the smaller version of the same book by the same author, UFO Cults and Contracts, Antichrist Delusion by David Allen Lewis. You can get it from New Leaf Press, which is in Arkansas. Those are really good books from a Christian perspective. You might also want to get the book from Chuck Missler, Alien Encounters, dealing with UFOs, a much more technical and very interesting book. Or you might want to get the book The Cosmic Conspiracy by Stan Deyo. Basically, the consensus of opinion of these guys is there are two kinds of UFOs. There are top secret government craft, and there are satanic manifestations, demonic. Okay? That's the best I've heard on that topic. Next question. How long were Adam and Eve in the garden before they sinned? Good question. Well, the Bible doesn't tell us exactly, but the Bible gives us a few clues. The Bible says in Genesis 5, verse 3, Adam lived 130 years and had a son and named him Seth. Now, before this time, they had been kicked out of the garden because they were out of the garden before any kids were born. Really, this 130 is the only clue we've got to go on as far as a number. We do know that before that time, they had Cain and Abel, and then Seth was born. So if you have a family having kids every 3 to 5 years, like is kind of normal, they could have been in the garden for 100 years before they sinned. We do know from Genesis chapter 4, Adam knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bare Cain, and then she again bears brother Abel, but no dates are given here. And we know that God drove them out of the garden of Eden before they had any children from Genesis chapter 3. And we know Eve is the mother of all living. There's no other people on earth that didn't come from Eve and from Adam. So we also know that they were out of the garden when any children were born. And we know at the end of chapter 1, God looked at everything and said it was very good. So Satan had not fallen, and they had not been kicked out of the garden during the first chapter. That's why I say probably 100 years. They could have been in the garden before they fell. Just the best I've heard on that one. Next question. Where was the Garden of Eden? Well, I think probably in Pensacola, Florida. The more I travel, the more I like living right here. I'm just kidding, of course. I don't think it's possible to tell where the Garden of Eden was. The Bible says in Genesis chapter 2, a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it parted and became into 4 heads. The name of the one was, it names all these rivers here, and it says, and the 4th river is Euphrates. Interesting. Now, there is a river Euphrates in Baghdad. It does not mean it's the same river. That flood totally wiped out the world. So when they got off the ark, they probably saw some places and said, wow, that looks like Euphrates. And they gave it the same name. People came from York and they named it New York. It's not the same place, okay? It just reminded them of something. So I don't think there's any way to tell where the Garden of Eden is. It's probably under 500 feet of mud right now. Who knows where? There's simply no way to tell that I can figure out. So the fact that Euphrates is in Baghdad today does not mean that's where the Garden of Eden was. We do know it's not far from there where the ark landed, up in Turkey probably. But, man, they were in the ark for 7 or 8 months floating around. They could have floated around the world 4 times. The Garden of Eden could have been in Australia, and the ark landed in Turkey. Plus, we don't know that they built the ark near the Garden of Eden. I mean, this is 1,600 years later. They could have walked around the world 30 times. Could have built it any place. There's no telling. So I would not be dogmatic about that. Next question. What about the mark of the beast? The Bible says in Revelation chapter 13, he causeth all, small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their forehead. Notice it does not say on their right hand. It says in the right hand or in the forehead. And I think every word of God is precious, and we ought to read it very carefully. Some have argued that in 1972, when they developed the barcode, the first 2 skinny lines, are the same computer designation for the number 6. In the middle and at the ends of each barcode is these 2 skinny lines. Now, I know they're just guard bars to trigger the computer to turn on, switch characteristics, and turn off. I understand all that. But it is the exact same designation as is used for the number 6. 2 skinny black lines with a single white line in between, which is the binary code for 6. So, I don't know about that. Could be true. I know some of the early barcodes that came out underneath had an F and an H, sideways. And some people have pointed this out and said, oh, this might mean forehead or hand. It is true that in the early 70s, actually before that, all of the numbers and letters of the alphabet were put into binary code so that it can be expressed as 0s and 1s, and the computer can read that, the scanner can read it. I know you can get chips put in your dog right now, or any pet can have this done. Actually, you can put them in people too. I've got several of the chips at home. These little chips about the size of a grain of rice can be encoded with a 10-digit alphanumeric code, and they actually are what's called a transponder. They don't have a battery in them, but if a radio wave hits it, it'll tell this chip to respond, and the radio wave energizes the chip to read back what the number is. That's how a transponder works. Carl Sanders, a good friend of mine, has lots of information on that. He's the one who actually helped develop the chip. You can call Carl Sanders. You might want to get Dean Martin right here in Pensacola, who does seminars on the microchip and how far the Mark of the Beast technology has come. He has some amazing material. Dean has a lot of stuff about the smart card technology if you want to talk to him. He's a good friend of mine. You can actually order the microchips in cards or in bracelets and locate anyone if you know their number through the satellite system. The GPS system right now can locate folks if they have one of these cards or these chips. So I kind of suspect, knowing what the Bible says, this is what's going to be like in the last days. Everybody will have to receive a chip, or you can't buy or sell. You'll be able to go to the store, run your groceries over the scanner, run your hand over the scanner, deduct the money straight from your bank account. A cashless society coming soon, prophesied 2,000 years ago in God's Word. There's a professor that had a chip put in his arm, so he computerized his house. When he walks into a room, it turns the lights on for him, turns the coffee pot on if he wants it, all computerized, all based on this chip. As he leaves the room, the computer knows, oh, he just left, shut the lights off. Interesting. Carl Sanders has great information on this microchip and how the Greek word for mark is actually etching, to scratch, to engrave, to stamp in a sculptured figure. He says the computer chips, of course, are etched into silicone, engraved into the silicone layers. Very convincing information he has that this is probably the computer chip technology that the Bible is talking about, the mark of the beast. Somebody says we could even mark known sex offenders, like this sign in Arkansas, you know. Welcome to Arkansas, home of Bill Clinton. In compliance with Megan's laws, the above is a known sex offender. I don't know if we ought to do that or not. Maybe so. Also, some of the things to watch for is HAARP technology. HAARP, which is High Altitude Aurora Research Project, I think. They're actually doing work on being able, with microwaves or ELF, extra low frequency, to be able to create a virtual lens in the sky. You microwave up, heats up the air and creates a lens, and the lens magnifies the sun on somebody else and burns them. Do a virtual mirror with HAARP technology, where you can bounce a laser off this mirror and hit somebody way on the other side of the earth. I don't know how far it's gone right now. I don't think you could find out, all top secret stuff, but there has been some amazing research done on HAARP technology. Some folks are pretty scared that it's coming very soon where they're going to be able to control weather and shoot planes out of the sky with this extra low frequency, ELF kind of stuff. I don't know. I know right now in Europe they're spying on farmers with satellites to see if you're claiming you're raising 50 sheep, but you're really raising 200. Interesting article about they count the number of animals to be sure farmers are not plowing land without permission. Communism at its best, okay? This article on CNN says, is human chip implant wave of the future? That's from January 99. Yes, I think human implant technology is the wave of the future. You'll see a time when you have to get a chip or you can't buy or sell. Dr. Cook, professor who lectured at 100 universities in 65 countries, said, his assessment of the coming New World Order under United Nations is that it will reduce everything to one common denominator. There'll be a single currency, single bank, single finance government, single tax system, single language, single political system, a single world court of justice, a single head, one world leader, a single state religion. He said each person will have a registered number without which he will not be allowed to buy or sell. And there will be one universal world church. Anyone who refuses to take part in this universal system will have no right to exist. Now this guy thinks it's great, and he's working to make it happen. What he doesn't comprehend is the Bible said this would happen 2,000 years ago. And the Bible warned us in Revelation 14, if any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone. Do not take that mark. I don't think they're going to actually, kill people who won't take it. They won't need to kill you. You just simply can't buy anything. You'll be shut out of society where you can't buy or sell. Stores will stop taking cash, stop taking checks, and stop taking credit cards. You don't have a chip? I'm sorry, you just can't buy anything. I think it'll be a slow strangulation process where we just are forced out. So watch out for that. One more question. What is this sovereignty issue? Well, I don't want to go off on a long rabbit trail here, though we could. Okay? God created people, which means we belong to God and He's the boss. People got together and created governments. The government then doesn't like the idea of being the public servant. So the government has done something very tricky here, I think. They created artificial persons. This gets into the straw man issue. If you call our ministry and order the tape about the straw man, it explains the whole thing about how there are many different United Stateses. There's the original United States with a small u, capital S. Then there's the current United States with a capital U, capital S, which is a totally different. That's a corporation, actually. It's not even the real United States. And we won't go into all that now, but you can call our ministry and get the straw man article if you want more on that and see how it ties in with the Wizard of Oz, being in Kansas or being in Oz, which is abbreviation for ounces, for gold. And you follow the yellow brick road, you follow the money trail. And it goes into the movie The Matrix and all that kind of stuff. We've got all that on video called The Straw Man if you want more on that. Okay, next question. What about the Shroud of Turin? Is that the rag Jesus was wrapped up in? Well, let's see what the Bible says. That's the best way to figure it out. I got the book, The Mystery of the Shroud of Turin, where these guys are saying, wow, this is it, folks. This is the old rag Jesus was wrapped up in. Here is a picture of what the shroud looks like. And you can see at the top what appears to be a face of a human with a beard. And the nail prints in the hands. His hands are crossed over his stomach. And they argue, this is the rag Jesus was wrapped up in. And you can still see the marks where he was, crucified. Well, there are some serious problems with this, okay? The shroud is said to show the outline of his beard and his wounds. Even the crown of thorns on his head where it left the wounds. But if you read John chapter 11, it says, he that was dead came forth bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Here we have an example of how they buried people. Lazarus here in John chapter 11, his body's wrapped up in one cloth, his face is wrapped up in a separate cloth. Notice that now, that's important. You read John chapter 20, and it says, then cometh Simon Peter following him, and went into the sepulchre, and he seeth the linen clothes lie, and the napkin that was about his head, not lying with the linen clothes, but wrapped together in a place by itself. The Bible is very clear. Jesus was wrapped up in two separate cloths. One for the body, one for the face. The Shroud of Turin has it all as one cloth. It might be an old rag, but it's not the one Jesus was buried in. It might even be 2,000 years old. I wouldn't argue about that. But it's not the one Jesus was buried in. See, the linen clothes were laid by themselves. In Luke chapter 24, we see the same thing. Then if you read in Isaiah chapter 50, this prophecy about Jesus said, I gave my back to the smiters, he was whipped, and my cheeks to them that plucked off the hair. When Jesus was buried, he didn't have a beard. The Shroud of Turin shows a beard. It's a good fundraiser for the Catholic Church, but it's not the rag Jesus was buried in. Okay? Plus 1 Corinthians tells us, doth not nature itself teach you that if a man have long hair, it is a shame unto him? The Shroud of Turin shows Jesus with long hair. We know from Scripture Jesus could not have had long hair. It would have been a shame. Plus, there were people who were called Nazarites from Numbers chapter 6. Now, the vow of the Nazarite was, the Nazarite would say, I'm going to do something for God, and until I do, I won't eat anything that comes from a grape, I won't kill anybody or get near a dead person, and I won't cut my hair or shave. And several other things, Numbers chapter 6. That's the vow of the Nazarite. Jesus was not a Nazarite. He was from Nazareth, which means he was a Nazarene, but he's not a Nazarite. There is no connection between the two. Samson was a Nazarite. He took a vow and said, I'm going to get rid of the Philistines. Well, he never did it. So his hair kept getting longer and longer, and God promised he would give him the power to do his vow if he would, do certain things. Samson never did it. Even back then, long hair was a shame because anybody with long hair, everybody would think, oh, I wonder what he promised and didn't do. It was a sign he hadn't fulfilled his promise yet. So it was a shame even back in the days of Samson. And Jesus could not have had long hair. If you look at the coins from the days of the Roman Empire, you see they all had short hair. You see the little olive wreath around the guy like Caesar, had short hair. If Jesus had long hair and everybody else had short hair, why did Judas have to go kiss him? To pick him out of the crowd. Judas could just say, oh, it's the long-haired fella, go get him. No, Jesus did not have long hair at all. Next question, where can I take courses about scientific creation? Well, there are lots of good Bible colleges. I've spoken in probably 20 Bible colleges that offer material on creation. Our ministry has produced a college course, CSE 101, CSE 102, CSE 103, and CSE 104 coming soon, where you can get college credit by studying my seminar at much slower, much more detail. You might want to get information from Landmark Freedom Baptist Curriculum. They've got good creation science curriculum for homeschoolers, if you want to get their stuff. You might want to call Don Boys. He's got a creation science curriculum up in near Chattanooga, Tennessee, in Ringgold, Georgia. He's a good friend of mine. You might want to get the Creation Study Guide from the Whitlock and Garowitz. I've met them years ago down in South Florida. They have a course on scientific creationism. You can call Charles Lynn or get the material through our ministry. He and I have developed a course on scientific creationism, just a homeschool course that somebody can take for probably elementary, upper elementary level students if you want more on like that, more on that topic. Next question. Do you really have a PhD? All you got to do is get on the internet and find all the skeptics who've blasted me, and there's 137 anti-Hovind websites at last count. And they're almost all of them spread information around among themselves. Nobody seems to check out the original source. And they'll say, well, Hovind doesn't really have a PhD. Well, yes, I do. Okay. PhD in the dictionary means Doctor of Philosophy. That's what it means, okay? I graduated from Patriot University, which is a non-accredited small Christian school. They have about 400 students. They've had about, probably 400 graduates over the years. There are about 25 graduates every year, usually 2 or 3 in the doctoral program. And you can finish by correspondence, which is what I did. It took me 9 years. I worked real hard for my degree. I don't know if anybody works for theirs or not, but I worked for mine. And yes, you can get their phone number here and call them. Patriot used to be part of Hilltop Baptist Church, and it was connected with them for many years. Patriot, their correspondence school grew so large, they moved out, bought a separate house, have a 3-story house, or three-level, split-level house that runs their ministry out of just all their correspondence school. And so some idiots have got this picture of this house on the internet as the school where Dr. Hovind graduated from. I don't have a clue where the house is in the first place, okay? And it doesn't matter. This is where they are now. It's not where they were when I went to school, when I took my degree. And even if it was, it wouldn't matter, okay? Many major universities have a doctoral program with 1 student, or 2 students. It doesn't matter. And there's all kinds of colleges that offer degrees over the internet. Correspondence it's perfectly legitimate. But if somebody doesn't like my degree, they don't have to call me Dr. Hovind. They can call me Kent or Mr. or Hey You. Let's get back to the topic now, okay? Talk about creation and evolution. Next question. Who wrote the book of Genesis? Well, this is really a very interesting question. The book of Genesis is written by 10 different authors. Some of the scoffers in the last few hundred years have argued Genesis has 4 different authors, Well, there's actually more than 4. But their argument is we have the JEPD for Yahwist, Elohist, Priestly, and Deuterist. And they'll say 4 different groups of people wrote the book of Genesis, and they did it for political gain, so they could make money or something like that. Who knows? Genesis, actually, was written by 10 different authors. And if you get the Defender's Bible by Henry Morris, he's got an excellent footnote right there in Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, about the teledoths, the 10 different authors of the book of Genesis. So, Moses is never credited as writing Genesis. Moses is considered the editor of Genesis. For instance, if you look at Genesis chapter 38, Judah said to Onan, "Go into thy brother's wife and marry her and raise up seed to thy brother." And you read it in Deuteronomy. It says, "If brethren dwell together and one of them die and have no child, her husband's brother shall go in unto her and take her to him to wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her." Then you read in Luke, and it says, Moses wrote, "If any man's brother die, having a wife without children," goes on and tells the story here. So some have argued, see, Moses wrote, you're supposed to marry your brother, and it says in Genesis that you're supposed to raise up seed to your brother. Well, it also says it in Deuteronomy. Moses wrote Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, but Moses did not write Genesis. He is the editor. He collected the book of Genesis. Actually, the book of Genesis was 10 different eyewitness accounts. And whenever there's a break and they're changing authors, it says, these are the generations of. It's very interesting to look through Genesis chapter 1 and the first 4 verses of chapter 2. It keeps referring to God. When you get to chapter 2, verse 4, the rest of that chapter refers to Lord God. Very different. This is probably Adam writing chapter 2. It is God writing chapter 1. In Genesis chapter 5, verse 1, it says, these are the generations of. That's the break point. That's somebody signing off, giving the clay tablets to the next person, saying, here, you take over. Genesis 5:1 says, this is the book of the generations of Adam. Chapter 6, verse 9, these are the generations of Noah. Apparently, Noah actually wrote part of Genesis. You get to chapter 10, and it says, these are the generations of the sons of Noah. Shem, Ham, and Japheth wrote part of the book of Genesis. Chapter 11, these are the generations of Shem. Shem wrote part. Chapter 11, verse 22, these are the generations of Terah. Terah apparently was one of the authors of part of the book of Genesis. Chapter 25, verse 12, these are the generations of Ishmael. 25:19, these are the generations of Isaac. Chapter 36, verse 1, these are the generations of Esau. Esau wrote part of the book of Genesis. Chapter 37, verse 2, these are the generations of Jacob. Each person is signing off. There are 10 different authors. Genesis is an amazing book. Obviously, different authors wrote this. The different styles of writing, different names for God, but no contradictions. Probably Noah took a few of the tablets with him on the ark, whatever had been written up to that point. First, 5 chapters. And that was preserved as part of the family heritage and passed on to the next generation. So, Genesis was edited by Moses, who lived right here, way after the creation. But Moses had access to the original actual accounts on these clay tablets. Now, what are symbiosis relationships? Well, a symbiosis relationship is when a plant and animal, or two animals, are together in such a way that they each gain something from the other. For instance, the clownfish lives in amongst the sea anemones. Normally, those sea anemones will sting anything that comes by, but it doesn't sting the clownfish. The clownfish is bright colored and draws prey in. They get tangled up, and they both end up getting food from this deal. Interesting. There are millions of symbiosis relationships that, in my opinion, absolutely defy an evolutionary explanation. They had to be created. Next question. Why don't we have giant insects today? Well, it's a good question. Insects breathe through their skin. They don't have lungs like we do, so they have to absorb oxygen through their skin. As an animal gets larger, it starts to get a problem in what's called the surface area to volume ratio. I'll show you how it works. If you had a cube that was 1 inch on each side, the side is 1 inch, the volume is 1 cubic inch. The surface area is 6. It would take 6 square inches of skin or paper or whatever to make a cube. If you take a cube and cut it out, you can lay it out like a cross, and it takes 6 square inches to cover it. That gives it a volume to surface area ratio of 6 to 1. What if we double the size? Let's make a cube that's 2 inches on each side. Now it has a volume of 8. 2 times 2 times 2. It has a surface area of 24. Well, by doubling the size, we reduced the surface area to volume ratio to 3 to 1. So if this was an insect trying to absorb oxygen through his skin, we've just created a problem. He's now twice as big, and he's got half as much skin to breathe through compared to his body volume. If you go to 3 inches on a side, now you go to 27 cubic inch volume, 54 surface area, 2 to 1. As you get smaller, the problem actually reverses itself. If you go down to 1/10 of an inch side, it is 1/1000th of an inch in volume. It is 0.06 surface area, a 60 to 1 surface area to volume ratio. If you go down to 1/100th of an inch, it is a great surface area to volume ratio, 600 to 1. The smaller an animal gets, the more skin it has and the less volume, the ratio changes dramatically, which is why an ant can fall off an airplane, fall down 5,000 feet, hit the ground, and walk away. He's got so much surface area, he's got his own built-in parachute. He just can't fall very fast. And that's why you could not get large insects today like they could before the flood, because they probably had greater air pressure. Giant insects are found. They did exist, okay? Giant cockroaches. Dragonfly with a 50-inch wingspan was found in Italy. Cockroaches 18-inch long have been found, fossilized. Centipede, 8.5 feet long. To me, this is indication that before the flood, there must have been something different. Walt Brown wrote the book In the Beginning. He's a good friend of mine, and it is a great book, and I highly recommend it. We sell it. But he says that he doesn't think there was a canopy before the flood. And I said, well, Walt, how do you explain the giant insects? He said, well, you're right. I don't know. I don't know what held the canopy up. I don't have the answers to all that. But I know we do find fossils of giant insects. They can't live in today's world, so something was different back then. So that's the theory, that probably they had double the air pressure from some kind of canopy. Giant grasshoppers, 2 feet long, have been found. Next question. Don't wisdom teeth prove evolution? I'm surprised how many times atheists have written me this question. Man has wisdom teeth, and that proves we evolved. Now, first place, if people were bigger before the flood, or if they were developing slower, let's suppose you didn't, get full grown until you're 25 years old, and everybody's 8 feet tall. Now wisdom teeth are not a problem because they would come in at the right time. By then your jaw's large enough to handle it. The only reason it's a problem today, our jaws aren't big enough to handle the extra tooth which comes in when you're 15 to 18 or 20 years old. So it's not a problem at all. Jack Cazzo, the dentist in New Jersey, has done a great work on this question about wisdom teeth. Probably man was larger in the past, and so the extra teeth were designed to come in at just the right time. So you want to see the book Buried Alive by Jack Cazzo. All right, hope this has been helpful. This was our question-answer session. If you have any more questions as you watch this tape or watch our other videotapes, feel free to call our ministry. It's much faster by phone for me than to take written questions because I get so much mail and email every day, but I'll be glad to talk with you personally. Just feel free to call. If you'd like more information from our ministry, you can get our catalog. We'd be glad to send that out right away. Thank you so much. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this material on creation and evolution. Much more important, though, than knowing all the facts about creation and how God made the world and all that, is to know for sure you're going to heaven. If you believed God made the world and you believed in the flood in the days of Noah and you believed the whole Bible, but you never did get saved, you'd still die and go to hell. The Bible says in Romans chapter 3 and verse number 23, "For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God." The Bible says we're all sinners. We've all broken God's laws. See, God gave the law and we have disobeyed. If you even just look at the Ten Commandments, let alone the other laws, we've broken them. We're guilty. We have disobeyed God's laws, plain and simple. When I was 16 years old, a friend of mine said, "Kent, do you know if you're going to heaven?" I said, "Oh, I don't know. I've been baptized and catechized and pasteurized and homogenized. What else is there?" And he said, "Are you going to heaven?" I said, "I don't know." He showed me from the Bible I was a sinner. I've disobeyed God's laws. I said, "Well, no argument out of me. You're right, I have." Then the Bible says in the book of Romans chapter 6 and verse 23, "For the wages of sin is death." Wages is something you earn, and you have earned death because of your sin. So have I. We deserve to die. We're guilty. God would be perfectly fair in sending us all to hell. But it goes on to say, the gift of God is eternal life. See, just like your parents gave you the gift of physical life when you got born, God wants to give you a gift of eternal life. And the only way to get it is through Jesus Christ. Romans chapter 6, verse 23. So my friend said, "Kent, you're a sinner." I said, "I agree." He said, "You deserve to go to hell. You deserve death. That's eternal death." I said, "Yeah, I agree. But Jesus died for you, and He wants to take you to heaven. He wants to forgive you and save you." Then he showed me Romans chapter 10 and verse number 13, which says, "Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved." He said, "Kent, if you'd like to ask the Lord to save you, He'd do it right now." And two people actually worked on me. One was my friend Tim, and he said, "Would you like to get saved?" After he showed me this, and I said, "No, I don't want that. Because if I ask the Lord to come in my heart and save me, then He's going to want to change my life." About a month later, my brother got saved. And my brother took me down to University of Illinois, where he was going to school, or Illinois State University in Bloomington, Illinois. And we visited a little church there, and my brother had just been saved a couple of weeks, and he brought me to church with him, and some of the guys there showed me and said, "Kent, you need to ask the Lord to save you." I said, "Boy, I sure do. I've been thinking about it. You're right. I'm ready." And so on that day, February 9th, 1969, I prayed and I said, "Lord, I'm a sinner. Would you forgive me and save me right now?" And He did, just like He promised right here. That was my birthday into God's family. Hey, if you're not sure you're going to heaven, why don't you ask the Lord to save you? It really is that simple. Just pray with me right now. Just say, "Dear Lord Jesus, I know that I'm a sinner. I've broken your laws, and I'm sorry. Lord, I believe you died for me. Would you please forgive my sin and save me right now?" Amen. Well, friend, if you just ask the Lord to come in your heart and save you, the Bible says, "Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved." You've got God's promise you're going to heaven. What you need to do is write this date and the time down in the front of your Bible someplace, because the devil will certainly try to make you doubt that you're going to heaven. And you need to start reading your Bible. You need to start going to a good church that believes the Bible and start learning what this book says and read God's Word. As a newborn baby, you need to grow by desiring the sincere milk of the Word. The more you read this book, the more you grow to be a good Christian. Call us and let us know, or write us a letter. We'd be glad to rejoice with you and give you some information to help you grow closer to the Lord in your new life. If we can be any help, don't hesitate to call. Thank you so much.